Hi, welcome back, guys. This is your friend Caller. What if with another fiction? What if Deku and Izuku's pirate adventure with Gold Roger? Now, before starting, please give this video a like and subscribe to the channel if you want more videos like this. Now, let's get into the fanfic. Come on, come on, come on, Hatsune shouted as she dragged Izuku by his wrist. May, can't this wait until after class? Hatsune kicked down the doors of Aldera Prep and kept running. Nope, it was supposed to be for your birthday. But I can't wait that long, baby. Now. As the school disappeared behind them, Izuku huffed and wheezed for breath. When he stumbled, Hatsune yanked him forward. Oh, May, slow down. Nope, no time. Hatsune came to a dead stop, with a sudden contemplative expression on her face. Izuku's momentum carried him forward until he fell onto his hands and knees. Actually, Hatsune said, come to think of it, we've got all the time in the world. As Hatsune cackled maniacally, Izuku took in her sweat and grease-stained shirt, her grimy hair, and the dark bags under her eyes. May, Izuku asked nervously, when was the last time you slept? I think it was a Tuesday. May, it's Monday. It won't be for long, she said in a sing-song voice. Izuku facepalm. May, please take a shower and get some sleep. We can do whatever it is tomorrow. Nope, time waits for no man. Hatsune latched onto his wrist before Izuku could react. She led him through a dilapidated stretch of the city until they came upon an old parking lot. Weeds sprouted in the cracks in the asphalt, and a pair of frogs lounged in a murky puddle. Nestled between an empty, rusted dumpster and a car on cinder blocks, its tires taken long ago, sat a boxy shape obscured by a white tablecloth. As Izuku hesitantly walked up to the obscured invention, Hatsune bounced on her toes. Come on, hurry up. I want to see this baby in action. Izuku gave it a hesitant poke. It's not going to explode, is it? It'll be fine. I rode that baby all day and night, and not once did it explode on me. I'd trust you more if you let me wear a blast suit first. But baby making with protection is so boring. Izuku sighed. Well, here goes. He slowly, carefully inched the tablecloth up, all the while leaning away. Hatsune huffed and said, quit being a tease and strip already. You know, there's something weird about what you just said, but I can't put my finger on it. Nope, done waiting. Hatsune yanked the cloth, unfurling a polished, gleaming DeLorean. Every inch of it, from the bundles of wires running along the outside of the vehicle to the wheels and hubcaps, paid homage to a certain movie they had shared. Grinning despite the sudden bout of existential dread curdling the contents of Izuku's stomach, Izuku asked, it's a time machine. It's a DeLorean. Hatsune slapped the top of the time-traveling car. This bad boy does some serious shit when it hits 88 miles an hour. Rolling his eyes, Izuku said, you built a DeLorean out of a time machine. Hatsune glared at him. You said that backwards and you know it. Chuckling to himself, Izuku gingerly opened a door and peeked inside. Oh wow, it's got the display panel and everything. Yep. Hatsune pointed at the glowing box perched between the front seats. And there's the flux capacitor? Wow. Izuku stroked the flux capacitor, 3 strings of lights covered by a glass panel, with awe and wonder in his eyes, before remembering that he had half his body inside something Hatsune had made. He flinched back as if bitten. May, this is too dangerous. It'll be fine, Hatsune scoffed. If traveling back in time would break anything, we would have already done it and already broken the thing. Since nothing is broken, everything is fine. That, Izuku said, slamming the door shut. Or nothing broke because we did the sensible thing and didn't mess around with a time machine that could break the universe. As Izuku walked away, Hatsune asked, do you really not want to meet All Might when he went to UA? Izuku threw open the passenger door and buckled himself in. Come on, we're wasting time, I think. Huh, we really do have all the time in the world. I know, right? Let's go. As Hatsum revved up the DeLorean without buckling in, Izuku glanced between her haggard appearance and the open road before them. May, do we actually need to drive this thing? Of course. How else are we supposed to get up to 88 miles an hour? Izuku went white as a sheet. May, no. May floored the accelerator. May, yes. Tires squealed as Hatsum wrenched the DeLorean out of the parking lot. The streets were mercifully empty, but the way the DeLorean fishtailed while Hatsum wrangled it under control made Izuku's stomach do cartwheels and backflips. May, this is too dangerous. You're going to run off the road. Roads? Where we're going. We don't need roads. Can this thing fly? Nope. Tried. Got too bored. Then we need roads. A car wildly honked at them as May swerved into oncoming traffic. Whoops, Hatsum said. We're clocking 70 now. We're almost there. We almost crashed, May. Stop before we get killed, or worse, arrested. Isn't that backwards? What would All Might think? Izuku started hyperventilating. The DeLorean rammed into a garbage can on the side of the road, scattering garbage bags and rotten food everywhere. I couldn't live with myself if he turned me in. Would he even give me his autograph? Izuku, concentrate. We're making history here. Concentrate? You're the one that needs to, May. Look out. A truck turned onto the road, too far out to pull back. Hatsum looked down at the speedometer and grinned. I think we can make it. No, May, we'll hit that truck. Time to see some serious shit. May, please, I don't want to die like this. To boldly go where no man has gone before. Izuku covered his eyes. I didn't even get to shake All Might's hand. To infinity and... A blinding corona of fire and electricity engulfed the DeLorean. As it tore at the boundaries of space and time, it slammed into the semi-truck. Space pinched itself around the point of contact between the two vehicles. Izuku felt as though his body was being stretched like putty, sucked into a straw, and kneaded by flaming, icy, thorny, merciless hands. Izuku blinked and shook his head as the world slowly came back into focus. When his brain finally started working, an endless landscape of rolling gray clouds stretched before him. The occasional flash of lightning lit the clouds from within, casting eerie shadows. Between the shrill whistling noise that came through the window and the stomach-lurching sensation of vertigo, Izuku quickly realized that they were falling. In the driver's seat, Hatsum slumped forward, her eyes shut and body limp. Blood trickled from a jagged gash on her forehead. Forcibly holding back his urge to pass out from fear, Izuku cautiously shook Hatsum's shoulder. May, are you okay? Please say something. Hatsum groaned and turned her head. MMRPH, can't sleep. Gotta finish baby for Izuku. He'll love it so much. Izuku's rapidly climbing anxiety regarding the rate at which the DeLorean plummeted towards the storming clouds warred with the ingrained habit to tuck a blanket over Hatsum and remove anything that might wake her up. Another crack of lightning, close enough to rattle the windows, made Izuku snap back into panic mode. May, we're falling. Wake up. Falling, Hatsum's eyes opened, but her eyes were glazed and unfocused. Is the flight module acting up again? Give it a kick and it'll be fine. Darkness shrouded the vehicle. The hairs rose on Izuku's arms as the air took on a static charge. Izuku prayed they wouldn't get fried. May, the car doesn't fly. You said so. We traveled back in time, but we're super high up in the air, and I don't know what to do. Please tell me you have an idea. Travel? Back. That's right. We're going back in time. Are we at 88 yet? Serious shit. As quickly as they entered the clouds, they broke through. Darkness shrouded the world, but a single flash of lightning illuminated the landscape below. burning the image into Izuku's mind like a photograph. Roiling seas surrounded an island. The buildings all blurred together in an amorphous blob. But at the island's heart, a wooden gallows stood out in sharp relief, cast in sharp, shadowed lines by the lightning's glare. Though he could no longer see it, Izuku could feel the island steadily drawing closer. It felt only fitting to Izuku that they somehow managed to appear over a tiny island and completely miss an entire ocean of hypothetically survivable landings. May, please, do something. Anything. Too tired. Need to keep working. May's eyes closed. Izuku unbuckled his seatbelt and scrambled over her, desperate for any source of salvation. Buttons changed the time on the front, but there wasn't a switch he could see that started the time travel. He tried to remember what Hatsum had done, only to realize he had his eyes closed at the time. He checked the speedometer. The needle stuck all the way at the end past 140. Another flash lit up this island. This time, it dwarfed the surrounding ocean, close enough to pick out individual buildings in the ring around the platform. Izuku leaned back, defeated, watching the storm-lit island rush towards the windshield. They were going to die because of him. He encouraged her to try it. He didn't stop her when she got too reckless. And now, when she needed him to save them both, he was powerless. Just a quirkless, useless Deku, like everyone said he was. Something snapped within Izuku. He shouted into the storm, "Please, please let me save her. I'll give anything." The platform lit up below him. As close to the ground as he was, Izuku could make out two people on the platform. First, the unholy amalgamation of a clown and a pirate, sword raised high over his head, staring in raw disbelief at the vehicle plummeting towards him. Second, a boy stuck in a stockade, no older than Izuku, in a red vest and a straw hat, grinning like a loon as the sword hung over his neck. Izuku flung himself over Hatsum, in a desperate attempt to shield her from the impact. Lightning engulfed the vehicle. The windshield shattered, and a body went flying head first into the flux capacitor between the seats. Izuku flinched at the sight of the limp, silent body draped over him. Then, with a shudder and a sudden static rush, the world shifted. Wind howled through the broken windshield. Izuku cautiously opened his eyes and gently shifted the body off of him. Daylight and clear skies greeted him. Without any clouds to obscure the landscape, Izuku got a clear view of the ocean below them. A mountain, with a river running down its side, loomed over the horizon, nearly reaching them and swiftly gaining height. Off to another side, Izuku could barely make out an island. Izuku's survey of the surroundings came to a screeching halt when he brushed against a pair of legs. Without the stormy sky casting its shadow over everything, the sight of the body, with blood gently trickling down where glass had cut it, stood out in sharp clarity to Izuku's eyes. Izuku felt bile rise in the back of his throat and almost bent towards the window to throw up until he saw how high up they were. Izuku's mind raced. They clearly went back in time again, but now that the flux capacitor was broken, they lost their only way to cheat death. This time, they were right above the ocean. If they could survive the impact, Izuku could get Hatsum out and drag her to the island. Even as the rational part of Izuku's brain calculated the miles he'd have to carry an unconscious body and hypothetical ocean currents and marine life that would try to drag him under, Izuku felt his resolve harden. He begged for a chance, and he got one. He wouldn't let it go to waste. As he looked down, Izuku saw a brown speck, rapidly gaining size beneath him. Izuku grimaced, and a sense of macabre humor overtook them. It only figured that they had somehow gone from falling towards an island to falling towards a ship. Still, Izuku realized it might be a stroke of luck. At worst, there would be wood to cling onto, and if he was really lucky, enough of the ship might survive for a makeshift raft. Half-baked plans of collecting rainwater and catching fish whirled in Izuku's mind as his thoughts drifted days ahead of the more immediate collision with the ship below. A tap on the window interrupted Izuku's thoughts. A man floated outside his window, his facial features blurred as though the wind tried to carry them away. His lips moved, but Izuku couldn't hear a word he said. Izuku rolled down the window and shouted back, "What did you say?" The man spoke again, and again. The wind carried away his words. Izuku leaned closer, hand cupped to an ear, but the man rolled his eyes and vanished. Izuku looked down, trying to find the man, and instead saw a hand gripping the underside of the vehicle. As the fingers strained with effort, the car lurched to a stop, then slowly descended towards the ship. The moment the wheels hit the deck, Izuku tumbled out of the vehicle and marveled at the wooden planks beneath his fingers. "We're alive," Izuku said in a shaky voice. "We're alive." "You sure are." Izuku's head snapped up. His eyes were drawn to the magnetic presence of the stocky man grinning down at him. Shirtless, red coat fluttering in the breeze, the man's smile and radiant aura reminded Izuku of All Might. "The name's Gold Roger." He held out his hand, and Izuku hesitantly took it. His grip nearly turned Izuku's bones into powder. Yet Gold Roger seemed gentle in treating him. I'm Izuku Midoriya. Are you a hero?" Sniggers came from the men around them. But Gold Roger stroked his mustache and took the question seriously. "Depends on your definition of hero, kid." "A vigilante, then." Izuku felt himself tense up, but the man before him turned his attention towards the vehicle. "So, Izuku, what's your story?" he asked. "Looks like something straight out of Vegapunk's laboratory, but something tells me it's not his." "May made it." Upon mentioning her name, Izuku remembered. He scrambled over to the driver's side and unbuckled her seatbelt. "May, wake up. Come on, please answer me." "That's a nasty bump on the head she's got," Gold Roger said. "But something tells me she'll be okay." "We need a doctor. Is there one on board?" "Our carpenter can sew stitches, but she needs a real doctor. Lucky for you, we were on our way to get one." Gold Roger looked inside and pointed at the other body. "What about this one?" "I don't know," Izuku admitted. "I think we crashed into him while we were falling." I'm sorry. I didn't mean to kill him." "Kill him?" Gold Roger gave the torso a poke, and the legs twitched. Izuku nearly leapt out of his skin at the sight. "Doesn't look dead to me." As the rest of the crew snorted and guffawed, Gold Roger grabbed the kid by his shirt and pulled. His head stayed stuck in the broken flux capacitor, but his neck stretched, longer and longer, until it was nearly half the length of the ship. Then, with a crack of broken glass and metal, the head flew free and snapped into place over the kid's shoulders. The kid blinked and looked around. "Huh. I thought there would be fire. Dadden said there was lots of fire in hell." He saw Izuku and asked, "Did you get a haircut?" No." "Huh. Weird." Luffy's eyes locked on Gold Roger, and he asked, "Who are you?" "Gold Roger," the man said with an amused grin. "And you are?" "I'm Luffy, and I'm going to be king of the pirates." "Well, I was, but I'm dead now." "What did the end of the world look like?" "I wanted to see it for myself, but I died." "Shishishi." "I haven't been there myself, but I'll let you know when I get there." "What?" "But you said you went there when they cut your head off. Didn't you keep the one piece there?" The pirate captain's eyes narrowed as he examined Luffy. "Now that's interesting. Your voice isn't supposed to be here yet." Gold Roger's eyes fastened on Izuku. All mirth vanished from his face. "And your story doesn't make sense," he said. "You speak of gleaming towers, roaring machines, and tablets of infinite knowledge. But the world tells me that none of those things exist, nor will they ever. You and her both. Where did you come from?" Izuku wondered if the captain had some kind of quirk to see where he came from. Hesitantly, Izuku answered, "The future." While Gold Roger's gaze bored holes through Izuku's skull, Luffy's attention wandered over to the rest of the crew. Seeing a familiar big red nose, Luffy shouted, "Hey, you're that clown guy Did you die too? Shishishi, how did you do that? Did you trip off the platform after killing me? Or did the Marines get you? The crowd parted, leaving Buggy out in the open. What? Me? What the hell are you talking about? Luffy looked closer by stretching out his neck. Buggy backed away until he hit the railing. Scratching his head, Luffy said, "You look different. Did you get a haircut?" "Don't be ridiculous. I've never seen you before in my life." The red-haired kid standing next to Buggy elbowed him in the ribs. "Hard to mistake you for anybody else. What with that giant nose of yours?" Buggy's face turned as crimson as his nose. "Did you just make fun of my nose? I'll gut you for that." As the young man laughed off Buggy's half-hearted attempts to pummel him to death, Luffy peered closer at him. A huge smile split his face, and the rest of his body rocketed forward, meeting up with his head and nearly knocking them both into the sea. "Shanks," Luffy shouted. "You said I wouldn't see you again until I got strong enough to fight you. Does that mean I'm strong enough? I beat up a lot of people, like that one shark guy who was really mean, and hey Shanks, your arm's back." Shanks blinked in confusion at him. "My arm? I've always had it." "Really? And here I thought that Sea King ate it." Luffy squinted at him. "That other scar's gone too, the one over your eye. Come to think of it, you look different. Did you get a haircut too?" Laughing awkwardly, Shanks said, "I don't think a haircut gets rid of scars." "Huh." Luffy's brow scrunched up, and he growled in pain and frustration as he pondered the situation. With a sudden burst of inspiration, Luffy declared, "It's a mystery scar." "Ah, sure. Yeah, too bad I'm dead now. It would have been fun fighting you for real." "You're dead?" "Yep. Clown guy got me." Buggy shouted an offended "Hey" at him. Luffy ignored the fist banging the back of his head. "Gold Roger's here, Clown Guy's here, you're here. So we must all be." Luffy glanced between Gold Roger and Shanks. He looked hopelessly lost. "You're not dead," he told Shanks. "How did you get here?" Shanks, equally confused, asked, "On this ship." "Is this ship hell? I thought there would be more people here." Luffy turned back to Gold Roger. "Everyone says you're the devil. Does that mean you run this place?" "I am captain of this ship," Gold Roger said. "But this ain't hell. We're coming up on paradise, and hell's on the other side." "Paradise? You mean like heaven?" "Dayton says that pirates don't go to heaven." Distraught, Luffy asked, "Does that mean I wasn't a real pirate? Did you fly a Jolly Roger?" "Yep." "Then you were a real pirate, and don't let anyone tell you otherwise." Gold Roger leaned forward and stared at Luffy's straw hat. "Interesting. Where did you get that?" "Shanks gave it to me." "I did?" Shanks asked, perplexed. He glanced between the two captains and asked, "Is that the same hat?" Gold Roger took Luffy's hat and held it up next to his own. They looked perfectly identical, down to the individual strands of straw and the red band holding it together. "Hey, give that back." Luffy snatched them both out of Roger's hands and tried to fit them both onto his head. But the precarious stack of hats refused to stay in place. Gold Roger guffawed and took one back. "Shanks gave it to you, you say? You must be something special if he gave it to you." For once, Luffy turned somber and held the hat in his hands. "I was supposed to give it back to him once I got stronger. I guess I never will." "Oh, I wouldn't say that." Gold Roger had a mirthful gleam in his eyes. "You're not dead, Luffy. You're in the past." Luffy tilted his head to one side. "The past? Of course I'm in there. I did a bunch of stuff, and that's the past. And you're doing all that past stuff now." "No, I'm not. All that past stuff already happened. And it's happening again, with you in it." Gold Roger grunted in irritation. "Geez, how do I explain this?" Silver's Rayleigh, a gruff man with salt and Pepper Hair patted Gold Roger's shoulder. "I got this, Captain." He cleared his throat and pointed at the DeLorean. "Mystery box." "Ooh." Luffy nodded and said, with an air of absolute certainty, "It's a mystery box." Gold Roger gave his first mate an irritated scowl. "Really, Rayleigh?" Rayleigh smirked back. "I dealt with you long enough to understand how idiots work." Izuku, having clumsily bandaged Mei's head during this exchange, finally found the courage to speak again. "So, about that doctor. How soon can we get there?" "In just a bit," Roger answered. "Of course, you'd be stuck with us for a while. If you'd like, we could take you to Logtown, though we wouldn't be able to help you with the doctor." Izuku looked down at Mei. On one hand, the thought of spending another moment in the dubious company aboard the ship made his skin crawl. However, a lack of funds and Mei's pale, blood-stained visage made up his mind. "I'll stay." "Good. It's a bit too late to turn around anyways. We're already caught in the current." The current. Izuku peered over the railing and noticed the water lapping at the hull. Looking further forward, the water churned in white frothy waves, and beyond that, the water went up, and up, and up. "What is that?" Izuku asked, breathless at the sight of water running straight up the mountainside. "Reverse mountain," Gold Roger declared. "First time?" Izuku stared numbly at the geological impossibility before him. Had a quirk made it? Why? And why were they sailing up a mountain? Did the doctor live up there? So many questions raced in Izuku's mind that he didn't even notice the crew hustling around him. One gave him a hearty slap on the back and said, "Don't just sit there, beanpole. Hold tight to something." Izuku frantically searched for something to cling to. As he made a mad dash for the mast, the ship hit the ascending rush of water and tilted. Izuku went sprawling onto the deck and smashed his nose. Hissing in pain, Izuku rolled and searched for Hatsune. She had slid towards the side of the ship, and the sudden jolt startled her awake. Drowsily, Hatsune pulled herself up the railing and leaned over it. Eyes widening in horror, Izuku scrambled towards her. He was too late. The ship hit a boulder and lurched. Hatsune flipped over the railing and tumbled into the water below. Izuku screamed and dove in after her. Water slammed into him from all sides as it hoisted him after the ship. Salty brine flooded his nostrils and stung the back of Izuku's throat. A stray fish caught in the violent waters slapped Izuku across the cheek, and a submerged wooden beam, splintered and wedged between two rocks, scraped Izuku's leg as he drifted past. Gasping for air and flailing wildly, Izuku hunted for Hatsune. He saw pink locks of hair floating and swam for it. The current whipped them both around like ragdolls, but just as Izuku felt the strength leaving his arms, the waters shoved them both together. Izuku clamped on and pulled her onto his chest, keeping her head above water even as his eyes sunk below the surface. "Just hang on, Mei," he shouted with his last breath. "I'll protect you, I promise." Izuku searched for the ship, but with all the salty spray in his eyes, he could barely make out the dull gray shapes whipping past him at alarming speeds. With his free hand, Izuku rubbed as much water out of his eyes as he could. He opened them in time to see a stretch of sharp, jagged rocks with white froths of water dancing over them. A skeleton, ribcage shattered against the rocks, clung to the nearest rock ahead of them. Izuku grimaced and turned his back to the rocks. As he braced for impact, he felt a hand grab him by the collar. Izuku grabbed onto Mei for dear life as the hand pulled him out of the water. Izuku wheezed and rasped for breath with the shirt's collar tightening like a noose around his throat. Spots flashed in his vision and his fingers stung painfully. Just as he felt Mei slipping from his fingers, he flopped against a wooden deck. Izuku coughed up seawater and shakily sat up. Luffy peered down at him. "Shishishi, what did you go swimming for? The current's way too strong for that." Izuku, mind hazy, simply pointed at Mei and said, she fell in. From behind him, Gold Roger said, "And you jumped in without a second thought. You got guts, kid." Other members of the pirate crew grinned, slapped him on the back, and told him he was a real pirate. Someone shoved a wooden flagon into his hands, and Izuku drank it on impulse. He coughed as the taste of strong, malty beer flooded his mouth, and the crew howled with laughter. "Got your legs back under you yet?" Gold Roger asked from the prow of the ship. "Come on up and see this." Izuku stood up and saw a vast stretch of ocean, lit up by brilliant rays of sunshine, and for a moment he felt wonder and awe tugging at his heart. "Where are we?" Izuku asked. Gold Roger grinned. "Welcome to paradise, kid. Beautiful, ain't it?" He raised a flagon of his own to a toast and said, "Here's to hoping you can handle it." The first thing Izuku felt as he drifted on the edge of consciousness was the rocking. His sleep-addled brain first thoughted an earthquake and dredged up muddled plans to hide under his desk. As the rocking continued and Izuku's brain shook off some of its sluggishness, Izuku realized that the rocking was too rhythmic and too persistent. Lacking context to understand the strange phenomenon, Izuku's brain decided to shelve it for fully awake Izuku to deal with. The second thing he felt was the pain. The dull, stinging throb of day-old bruises was an old friend of Izuku's, and he could tell much by their character. The absence of prickling burn wounds meant Kaken hadn't taken a crack at him. His arms took the worst of it, meaning he was protecting something. Probably his hero notes. His legs were also beat up, and he dimly noted the presence of a long scratch along one leg. He tried running first. Didn't get away. Right. The third thing he felt was the bandage. Not his own clumsy wrappings with the roll of gauze hidden in the bottom of his toothpaste box, but flat, neat, and tightly wound. Realizing that someone had professionally treated his injuries snapped Izuku awake with a jolt of dread. He looked around. The room was dimly lit, with a lone window at the side, but even in the murky shadows, Izuku could tell the walls were made of wood. The mattress felt odd. Soft, but lacking the springiness of memory foam, and smelling faintly of wet bird. "'Bout time you woke up," a gravelly voice groused. Izuku turned. A man sat next to his bed. Though the shadows hid much of his features, Izuku could tell, even though he slouched, that the man was short. 5 feet at most. "Who are you?" Izuku asked. "Crocus. As of now, I'm the ship's doctor." The word ship bounced around Izuku's brain like a loose pebble. It struck a memory and started an avalanche. An ocean view from atop a mountain. Drowning in the current. The smooth, grainy texture of wood against his palms. The crack of lightning engulfing the DeLorean. A swirling vortex of thunderclouds. The headlights of the oncoming truck. The DeLorean. May. Izuku bolted up, and his head swam. Crocus irritably swatted him back down with one arm. "Take it slow, lad. There's a good chance you got concussed like your friend." "May, where is she? Is she okay?" Crocus leaned back, giving Izuku a clear view of the other bed. A clean bandage wrapped around her head. Izuku tried to get up again, but the doctor shoved him into the pillow. "Rest. She'll be fine. Now, you wait right there, while I get you breakfast." Breakfast was a crumbly biscuit drowning in gravy, a slab of bacon thick enough to club someone with, and a handful of plump orange berries Izuku didn't recognize. Yet, the first morsel awakened a ravenous hunger in his gut, and he licked every morsel off his fingers. "Tried to tell the captain that it'd be best to give you gruel, but Roger looked at me like I was nuts," Crocus mumbled as he rummaged through a cabinet. "Not real food, Pa. What else is a man missing half his teeth supposed to eat? Easy on the stomach, quick but steady energy. But no, if it isn't dripping with grease, it isn't food." Izuku sat up, slowly this time. Crocus watched him like a hawk, but otherwise didn't move. "Thank you," Izuku hesitantly said. "Pa, just doing my job." Crocus held a wooden tube to Izuku's chest. It reminded Izuku of a stethoscope, but primitive. Crocus poked and prodded him in a few places and nodded. Right, nothing broken. Breathing's fine. No concussion. Now, out you get. Izuku hesitated at the door. Could I stay? I want to make sure May's all right, and… What do you think I'm here for? Decoration? Crocus roared. I'll watch your girl for you. Now clear out, before I throw you back overboard. Izuku scurried out of the office and stopped dead at the sight before him. He hadn't ever seen a wooden ship before, aside from a couple of pictures. But the Oro Jackson felt impossibly large around him. The masts towered above him, seeming to touch the clouds, and the canvas they carried ballooned out as it caught the wind. Izuku felt a thrum under his feet, a gentle humming of the wood as the ship plowed through the water. Every plank of the ship radiated strength. Looking down, Izuku finally noticed that he no longer had shoes or socks. He wriggled his toes, felt the smooth grain of wood against his skin, and felt suddenly paranoid that he'd end up with splinters all over his feet. The rest of his clothes were gone, replaced by a blue and white striped shirt and baggy shorts that felt a touch too long and loose for him. Twine tied around his waist kept his shorts from falling around his ankles. A gentle shove sent him sprawling to the deck. Izuku looked up and saw a big-chested man hauling rope past him. Clear the deck, the man called back at him. If you're going to gawk around all day, do it somewhere out of the way. Heart leaping up to his throat, Izuku nodded and hurried away. More glances of the ship crossed his eyes in a dizzying kaleidoscope of unfamiliar sights. A man clambered up a rope swinging in the wind until he reached the crow's nest atop the mast. A woman jerked on a fishing rod and hauled a fish the size of a small whale out of the water. She held it over her shoulder with one hand while it flailed around. Two men shook dice at a rickety wooden table. One cheered when the dice stopped rolling, while the other pushed a pile of gold coins. The ship lurched. A huge spray of water blotted out the sun before falling in a rainbow shimmer. Izuku scraped his knees on the deck, but the man climbing the rope leaned lazily against the mast as he watched the horizon. The woman chucked the fish below deck without breaking stride, and one man grinned cheekily at the dice, now showing different numbers, while the other cocked back a fist. A lean man with graying hair cuffed them both as he walked towards Izuku. Izuku stared nervously at the newcomer. Sensing the tension, the man leaned on the railing next to Izuku and stared up at the sky. The ship hit another wave, and Izuku barely caught himself. Never been on a ship before, have you? Izuku swallowed. And no, sir. Name's Rayleigh, not sir. I don't have time to babysit a pipsqueak like you. So here's what you'll do. Watch, listen, learn, and don't get in the way. Got that? Why, yes, sir. Rayleigh rolled his eyes. Quit calling me sir. I'm not some damn Marine. I'd threaten to throw you overboard, but you look half ready to jump in again. Izuku blanched and tried to speak, but he fumbled over his own tongue. With a sigh of irritation, Rayleigh got up and stretched. Relax, kid. We're not going to eat you. Roger vouches for you, so you're free to walk around. Don't cause trouble, and we'll let you off at the first safe port we come across. With those final parting words, Rayleigh left Izuku to his own devices. Having nothing else to do, Izuku did exactly what he said. It took a while to find a spot nobody visited, as every so often members of the crew roamed the railing, hunting for fish schooling near their deck, or adjusting the ropes holding the sails in place. For a while, Izuku lost himself in the organized bustle aboard the ship. Some men swabbed the deck with long wooden brushes, others sanded down stray splinters, or hauled up kegs and barrels from storage. Most others lounged about on deck, or fought with fists and blunted blades, or played dice games with piles of silver and gold changing hands. As the novelty of the ship's inhabitants faded, Izuku's thoughts strayed towards home. He wondered how worried his mom must be, before remembering that she wasn't even alive yet. He remembered the shattered flux capacitor, told himself that May would fix it somehow. Surely she could find the parts they need, right? Thinking about parts, Izuku hunted the ship for anything May could salvage. Years of dumpster diving at the beach at May's behest made him a veritable expert on salvageable scrap. But there was an eerie lack of anything resembling technology aboard the Oro Jackson. No motor at the aft, no GPS systems or speaker systems. The steering looked entirely manual. If the way the man's arms bulged as he wrestled the wheel towards port was any indication. Even among the crew, not a cell phone or gaming system could be seen. Maybe there's someone with a powerful technomancy quirk around, Izuku muttered to himself. Or it could be a group that's dedicated to the aesthetic. I think I would have heard about a group like this, but it is 40 years ago. The ship went dark. A loud cry of hailstones echoed across the ship. Within seconds, everyone had swords and clubs out. Izuku felt his heart race in his chest and wondered if this was how he'd die. Izuku stared numbly around him as the crew waited. Hailstones. Was that what they said? Hailstones, when he could still feel the summer's afternoon heat on his arms. Then a sphere of ice, the size of his head, shattered against the deck in front of him. An icy splinter struck Izuku on the arm. More hit the water with loud splashes. Eyes wide, Izuku scrambled across the deck. All around him, pirates swung swords and clubs through the air, slicing and smacking the balls of ice into more manageable pieces. Other pirates ran with barrels strapped to their backs, scooping up chunks of ice. Izuku's heart leapt into his throat as hailstones crashed all around him. He tried a door, but it was locked tight. Panicking, Izuku looked around and saw the gambling table, its dice and cups abandoned. Izuku dragged it over to the wall and huddled underneath it. A hailstone hit the table with a booming thud, but the wood held. It felt like an eternity that Izuku shivered beneath the table as death reigned around him. In truth, it was closer to a minute. The hail stopped, and a dense cloud of fog rolled in. Eyes peeled. Everyone, someone shouted. Heavy fog. Watch for rocks. Izuku blinked. Rocks. Out at sea? But as he stood, a shadow loomed in the mist. All too quickly, a rock emerged, just feet from the deck. Izuku shouted out in alarm. His shout went ignored, but another pirate called, "Hard to starboard." The ship lurched sideways, and the rock scraped against the hull. As they passed it by, another rock appeared. Sailors tugged on ropes, and the helmsman threw himself at the wheel. The ship danced towards port, narrowly missing the rock. Close to the bow as he was, Izuku noticed another rock, shorter than the rest. When they were nearly on it, without the watchman giving cry, Izuku panicked and shouted, "Another rock, port!" The ship barely started turning when it rammed against the rock. The ship bounced in the water, and Izuku clutched at the railing as he flew up and over the deck. His feet found wood, and he scrambled back onto the ship. "Hey kid," the helmsman shouted down. "Call it out a little faster next time. Nearly lost my arm on that one." "Sorry," Izuku shrunk in on himself. He flinched when a hand gave him a gentle slap on the shoulder. A boy about his age, with red hair and a tanned complexion, gave him a grin. "Don't mind Briggs, he's a bit cranky. Nice job spotting that rock. We wouldn't hear the end of it from Tom if we broke the keel of his ship. Name's Shanks, by the way." Izuku." Izuku took his hand and winced at the young man's crushing grip. "Weird name. Anyways, heard you were above deck with all those hailstones falling. Did you try catching one?" Izuku gaped at him. Catching one? He would have gone splat if he tried. Izuku fumbled for an answer, but Shanks cut him off with a clap on the shoulder. "Come on, you gotta meet Buggy. Don't mind the knives, he's just got a bit of a short temper." "Knives?" Before Izuku could protest further, Shanks dragged him below deck. down some long hallways and past throngs of crew members shoving past. Shanks squeezed around a corner and threw open a narrow door. "Yo, Buggy, found him." As the door slammed against the wooden walls, Buggy leapt up. The knife he had been sharpening sliced clean through his thumb, and the severed digit hit the floor. Izuku turned white as he stared at it. "Buzz off, Shanks, I was busy. Could you at least knock first? Come on, don't tell me you aren't dying to hear about the future." "He's from the future." Shanks looked at Izuku. "You are from the future, right?" Izuku pointed at the thumb and stammered. His thumb. We need ice for that." "What, this?" Buggy asked with a grin. He picked up the thumb and put it on backwards. He wiggled it back and forth and chuckled at the awkward way it bent. Izuku's color instantly returned to his face. "Wow, is that your quirk? Ability to detach and reattach your limbs, and immunity to cutting. You were caught by surprise. Is it an aspect of your quirk? Is it a reflex, or a function of the quirk itself? Would it work if you crushed it off?" Buggy grimaced. "Haven't tried it, and I'd rather not break any bones. I'm a chop man. Slice me and dice me, and I can beat you up with my pieces." To demonstrate, Buggy cut his arms and legs off and danced a jig on the floor. Izuku reached for his backpack, only to find it missing. "Fascinating. And is your nose a part of your quirk as well?" My nose?" Buggy squawked. "Is there something funny about my nose?" Izuku faltered. "Well, it is unusual looking. Is it made of rubber?" "Rubber?" Buggy's face reddened to match his nose. "It's a nose, you idiot." "Really? You kind of look like a clown with it." Buggy's hand crept towards his knife. "And what exactly is a clown?" Shanks grinned and asked, "Are clowns terrifying?" Izuku looked up at Shanks and saw an expectant look in his eye. Glancing between the two cabin boys, Izuku hesitantly answered, "Absolutely. People run screaming when they see them." Buggy's hand stopped. "Really? What do clowns do?" Izuku first thought of circuses and riding unicycles and getting pie thrown in their faces, and discarded them. He ran through a short list of scary clowns. Pennywise was absolutely terrifying, but also not really a clown. And that was the list. Sweat rolled down Izuku's face. Thoughts darted through his head, too fast to process. Rainbow wigs, rubber nose, white face paint, clowning around, scary. There was one clown who terrorized an entire city. Robbed banks, blew up hospitals, and lit an entire pile of money on fire. Buggy looked intrigued at first, then disgusted. Burn money? Who the hell would do that? Someone crazy. Anyways, there was this one guy that tried to threaten him. He took a pencil, set it on the table, and asked if anyone wanted to see it disappear. Buggy, skeptically, said, "And that's supposed to be scary." Izuku gave him a nervous, forced smile. He made it disappear in the guy's eyeball. Slam. And then he went ta-da. Buggy guffawed. "That's hilarious. What else did he do?" Izuku quickly ran out of Dark Knight scenes to rehash, and the rest was a confused jumble of Pennywise and regular circus clowns. Halfway through the explanation, Buggy brought out parchment and wrote down everything he said. Big tent, and juggling knives on a unicycle. Ooh, how about swords? Would that work? And tigers, lions, big, dangerous animals. Don't know how I'd fit an elephant on a ship. And thus, Izuku spent his first afternoon aboard the Oro Jackson, wondering exactly what he was unleashing upon the world. Thoughts of the potential collapse of causality came to a halt with a hefty knock upon the door. "Oi, shrimps, dinner's ready." Buggy and Shanks both sprinted out of the room before Izuku knew what was happening. Having to fumble across the ship on his own, Izuku followed the sounds of cheering and clattering plates until he found the mess hall. And what a mess it was. Dozens of greasy, Sweaty men hunched over a long wooden table, snatching food off every plate and cramming it in their mouths, while a bemused chef munched on a turkey leg and threw plates into the empty spaces as food disappeared. Gold Roger sat at the head of the table, dragging entire plates towards him like a bear, while Rayleigh plucked choice cuts and steaming vegetables like a heron. Shanks waved at Izuku from his corner of the table. "Hey, Izuku, saved you a seat." To call it a seat would be generous, given the tiny sliver of space left at the table. Izuku squeezed in between Shanks and Buggy, suffocating in the hot, boisterous atmosphere. Buggy's elbow dug into his ribs as the clown-looking cabin boy dug into a turkey breast. Shanks, mouth full of meat and potatoes, gestured towards the plate and said through his half-chewed food, "Help yourself." Izuku watched the flurry of hands and food and felt like an elderly man trying to cross a busy intersection. Everything flew too fast for him to process. He reached for a plate in front of him, and a rubbery hand darted halfway across the room and snatched it. A plate piled high with tuna steaks appeared, and like locusts, entire swarms of silverware descended and devoured them. All at once, the eating stopped. Pirates sauntered away, belching and patting distended bellies, while a few went around collecting dirty plates. Izuku eyed the chicken bones with strips of meat hanging from them. But he had no appetite after that display of gluttony. Glumly, Izuku stood and followed Shanks out of the mess hall. Or rather, he tried to. After a turn in a hallway, Izuku got lost and ventured back above deck to escape the claustrophobic network inside the hull. The sun dipped towards the horizon, casting the ocean in a glittering orange hue, and for a moment, Izuku basked in the sight. Between the salty tang of the sea, the wind blowing through his hair, and the gentle warmth given off by the setting sun, Izuku felt a moment of peace that made his simmering hunger and worries drift away in the Oro Jackson's wake. A loud cry of "Zoro, Sanji!" broke the moment's tranquility. Izuku turned around and saw Luffy peering over the railing with his rubbery neck, opening barrels and checking under crates. Luffy leapt over Izuku onto the bow of the ship and leaned around the figurehead. "Nope, Nami's not here either. Where is everybody?" Luffy squinted at Izuku, as if seeing him for the first time. Then he said, "Hey, you were in the mystery box too. Have you seen Zoro? He gets lost easily. Sanji, Usopp, and Nami don't normally get lost either. But I haven't seen them all day." "Zoro?" Izuku asked. "Is he a friend of yours?" "He's my first mate," Luffy said cheerfully. "He walks around with 3 swords and holds one in his teeth, like this." Luffy bit on his arm to demonstrate, and the rest of his words were muffled. And he thwing it a wound with high teeth. I see. They didn't come with you in the, mystery box, right?" Izuku drew in a deep breath and asked, "You know we're in the past, right?" Luffy gave him a blank look and picked his nose. Izuku took a deep breath and asked, "How old were your friends when you left them?" I don't know. I never really asked them." "Huh, I don't know their birthdays either." With a look of horror, Luffy asked, "Did we miss all their birthdays? I never got to eat their cake. Are they about your age?" Luffy hemmed and hawed before saying, "Yeah, why? And how old are you?" Luffy proudly pointed to himself and said, "Just turned 17. And now I got to sail out and find my brother." Izuku frowned at that tidbit. Had the legal age for adulthood really been 17 40 years ago? Brushing the thought off, Izuku said, "We're 20 years in the past. What that means is, 3 years from now, you're going to be born." Judging by the glazed look in Luffy's eyes, Izuku knew he was fast losing him. Abandoning tact, Izuku said, "Your friends aren't anywhere. They don't even exist yet. If we don't get the time machine working again, you would have to wait 20 years before you ever see them again." "Got it. Then I'll just wait 20 years. Izuku stared at Luffy's cheerful grin in shock. "Do you have any idea how long that is?" "Very long. Luffy's face lost its levity. Longer than I've been alive. But I know they'll be waiting for me no matter how long it takes. Izuku tried to wrap his head around Luffy's logic. You'll be 20 years older when you see them. So, I'll still be me. And they'll still be the same age. You'll be older than all of them. Twice as old. Luffy's brows scrunched up again. How the heck does that work? I've never seen anybody not get old. Izuku, finally abandoning attempts to explain time travel, thought about his own situation. He and May made 2 jumps back. 40 years. He would see his mother again, but he'd be older than her. He'd have gray hair and wrinkles, no longer distracted by the new sights, dangerous weather, and the crewmates. Izuku felt the reality of his situation crushing him. Back in time 40 years, no money. His phone had vanished beneath the waves. May was in a coma. And the DeLorean had a hole through its flux capacitor. His head was swimming, even as he took frantic gulps of air. His hands shook, and sweat ran by the bucketful down his chest and back. As his vision blurred, Izuku whispered, "I'm stuck here. I'm never going back home." While Izuku had his panic attack, Luffy leaned forward, his face an inch away without the other realizing it. Frowning and humming to himself, as if endeavoring to solve a convoluted puzzle, Luffy raised one finger and flicked it against Izuku's forehead. Izuku nearly flew over the railing. "Oh, what was that for?" "You remind me of Kobe." Who? Another friend. He didn't want to be a pirate, though. Wanted to be a marine. Luffy made a disgusted face. "He was stuck with some ugly pirate lady until I beat her up." Izuku paused, unsure what to make of Luffy's story. He nervously gathered himself and said, "There's nothing that I can do." Kobe said the same thing, until he didn't. And now he's a marine. I think. I kinda left after that part. With a quick laugh, Luffy walked off. As the sun set over the waves and the Oro Jackson sailed for the next island, Izuku asked, "Is there really something I can do?" Izuku never thought of himself as a miserable person. Sure, his hopes and dreams had been crushed into fine powder, immolated, and pissed on at the ripe age of 4 by his quirkless genetics. His classmates, and even a few teachers regularly mocked him for his condition. And people he never knew gave him pitying or hostile looks the moment they realized he couldn't shoot fireballs out of his pinkies. But he still had May and her inventions, his mom, and his hero notes. But now, May was still unconscious. His mother was in elementary school, and his hero notes were more water than paper at this point. And as if that wasn't enough, he had skipped dinner, stayed awake the entire night between the rambunctious snoring of the crew crammed into the sleeping quarters and his own anxious thoughts. Then also skipped breakfast because he couldn't find his way back to the mess hall. In short, Izuku was dead tired, almost hungry enough to beg a random, potentially dangerous stranger for food, and hopelessly lost in both space and time. Izuku, master of denial regarding his misery, had firmly passed that first stage, lacked the energy or the spine for anger, had no one to bargain with, and moved into a 3-bedroom suburban home with a 30-year mortgage smack dab in the heart of Depression Town, with half a lifetime of debt to pay off. Izuku stared off the ship's railing. The sun shone brightly in the sky, and a gentle breeze carried a refreshing scent of ocean spray and rich seaweed. But Izuku's eyes only saw sights from home. His mother's face. A bowl of katsudon. Even Bakugo. Ugh, just looking at him is making me feel bummed out. Shouldn't we just leave him alone? The words washed over Izuku, and he didn't pay them any mind. He kept staring out, even as a shadow passed over him, until a finger prodded him in the shoulder. Izuku turned and looked, and saw just 2 fingers hovering in midair. They grabbed his nose and twisted, just hard enough to make Izuku feel a twinge of pain. "Gotcha!" Buggy shouted as his fingers reattached themselves to his hand. "Ah, that one's a classic." Izuku gave the cabin boy a cursory glance and went back to staring at the waves. Buggy's detached head floated in front of him and shouted, "Hey, I'm talking to you." Izuku didn't even twitch. Buggy's head floated off, and he whispered, "What the hell am I supposed to do?" Seconds later, Buggy tapped him on the shoulder. This time, the fingers had an entire body attached to them. "So, what's got you so down?" Buggy asked. Izuku sighed and said, "I wish I could go home." "Well, what's stopping you? Just get a ship and sail there. It doesn't even exist yet." Buggy went cross-eyed before snapping his fingers. "Ah, right. You came from the future. Have you tried stabbing someone? That always makes me feel better." At Izuku's terrified expression, Buggy panicked and added, "I'd let you borrow one of my knives. Just don't get too much blood on it, okay?" Izuku stood as petrified as a statue. After a few silent seconds, Buggy gave him a puzzled frown and poked him on the forehead. Izuku was halfway over the railing before two sets of hands pulled him back up. "Easy, Buggy," Shanks said. "Crocus will use your head for a bedpan if you toss him in a second time." "What did I do?" Buggy complained. "I barely even touched him." "Why don't we try this again, okay?" Shanks grabbed Izuku by the shoulders and moved him away from the railing. "Sorry about that. I sent Buggy over first because I thought it would be funny. And it was. Fuck you, Shanks. Out in the open, with all the crew to see? At least buy me dinner first." The few pirates in earshot roared with laughter, while both Buggy and Izuku turned as red as the clown cabin boy's nose. "Anyways," Shanks said, "you're trying to get home, right? Where are you from?" "Musutafu." "Huh. I've never heard of that island. Well, what's it like? How big is your village?" Izuku found himself describing his hometown. As he described concrete roads and buildings hundreds of feet high, both sides became more and more confused. "Now I know you're making things up," Buggy shouted. "Ships that can fly in the air?" "Why not?" Shanks retorted. "We know sky islands are a thing. Why wouldn't someone make a ship that can fly? Bet you could fly over the Red Line, or even the Calm Belt." "That's just crazy talk. It's one thing to coat a ship and have it float up, but to actually sail? You'd be blown wherever the wind took you." Shanks laughed and said, "Wouldn't that be amazing?" Buggy fumbled for an answer, but was saved from responding by Izuku's grumbling stomach. Shanks looked Izuku over and asked, "Did you get breakfast?" Izuku timidly shook his head. Shanks dug into the back pocket of his shorts and pulled out a lumpy biscuit. "Here, I'll just filch another one from the pantry." Izuku warily examined the dubious pastry, but his stomach vetoed his brain. He took a cautious nibble of the tacky, dry biscuit. It made his mouth sore by simply chewing on it, and it had less flavor than a saltine cracker. But he greedily ate the whole thing. "There, feel better?" Shanks asked. "I find food always helps." I guess so. Thanks." Simply being reminded of his misery was enough to turn Izuku's thoughts back to his lost home. Sensing the change in mood, Shanks asked, "Want to climb up to the crow's nest? I bet we'll spot the next island soon." "Where are we going?" Izuku asked. "No idea. There's 11 different routes we can take coming off Reverse Mountain, and it's random which one we get." "Have you seen a log pose before?" When Izuku shook his head, Shanks dragged him off to the helm. The helmsman swiped at Shanks, but the cabin boy gave the scarred, grizzled man a cheeky grin as he swiped a glass orb off the helm. Izuku peered at the log pose curiously and said, "There aren't any directions on this. You just follow the needle." Shanks twisted it around, showing how the needle always pointed straight ahead. The magnetic field's all screwed up in the Grand Line, and each island has its own pole. The needle points towards one, then resets when we spend enough time on it. The only other way to find an island is to use an eternal pose, which always points towards a specific island. You can't find islands on a map? Izuku asked. Both Shanks and Buggy laughed at that. People have tried mapping them, Buggy said, but no one's ever been able to do it. Some say the islands move. Others claim it's a curse over the entire Grand Line, messing with people's heads while they try charting islands. The sea will turn you around without you even knowing it. Buggy looked at the log pose and said, "See? We're going the wrong way now." "Give that back," the helmsman roared, and he slammed Buggy on top of the head. The ship swung around as the grumbling helmsman wrenched the wheel aside. "And that's why you never sail without a log pose," Shanks said. "So, race you up to the crow's nest?" Shanks hauled himself up a rope before Izuku could blink. Buggy shouted after him, "Hey, wait till I'm ready, you cheater." His body flew up in the air, leaving his boots behind. Izuku stared up at the two of them as they flew up the ship's mast, then examined the mast. Rungs were cut into the side, and Izuku slowly climbed his way up them. His arms were burning, and he had blisters forming on his palms by the time he made it to the top. "Well, looks like you beat Buggy up here." "What? No, he didn't. I was up here first, you liar." The wind nearly blew their words away. It blew so strongly against the sails. The rocking of the ship, just a subtle shifting under his feet at deck level, felt far stronger in the tiny platform atop the mast. Izuku clung to the side until his knuckles turned white. "Your feet are still on the deck," Shanks pointed out. "That means even the landlubber beat you up here." "Up yours, Shanks. Most of me is up here. That's got to count for something." Izuku looked down and saw Buggy's disembodied feet angrily stamping on the deck. Izuku asked, "Can't you carry your own feet?" "I've tried," Buggy grumbled. "It's like trying to lift yourself up in a bucket. No matter how hard I pull, I can't get my feet in the air." Izuku leaned over the side of the crow's nest. "Ah, so your body's mass resides in your feet, while the individual pieces have zero mass. But then how do they move? And wouldn't the wind blow them around? Actually, since they have zero mass, they wouldn't accelerate when force is applied. But then, how can you apply force with your disembodied limbs if they have zero mass? Does that mean it's actually spatial distortion? That would explain why I don't see internal organs." As Izuku muttered to himself, Shanks and Buggy exchanged looks. "Do you have any idea what he's saying?" Shanks asked. "Not a clue. Should I try poking him?" Shanks eyed the low sides of the crow's nest and the long drop to the deck. "Only if you feel like swabbing him off the deck. I mean, it would be funny." Shanks gave him a flat look, and Buggy raised his hands. "All right, sheesh. You don't have to take it so seriously." A shout from above them startled Izuku out of his ramblings. "Hey," Luffy shouted. "I think I see an island from up here." Izuku looked up. Luffy was wound atop the very peak of the mast like a rubber band. Floating next to him, the pirate with wind powers held a hand over his eyes. "Nicely spotted. You kids better get down, 'cause this'll get ugly." Buggy swallowed, while Shanks' eyes glittered with excitement. "Do we get to go along this time?" Buggy gave Shanks a look of betrayal, while the other pirate gave a nod. "Don't get too far ahead of the others and pick your fights. I'll have our new doctor tie you to your beds if you get so much as a scratch." "Hey, I want to come too," Luffy shouted. "Those islands are shaped like meatballs. I bet there's meat." "Take it up with the captain." The lookout pirate drifted down, and the wind left with him. Shanks slid down a rope, while Luffy and Buggy simply jumped off the crow's nest. By the time Izuku made it back down the rungs, the crew had gathered, swords and axes in hand, in front of Gold Roger. "Ready the cannons," Roger shouted. "We'll soften the place up a bit before going in for the kill." "Are they really rock pirates?" one asked. "I thought you wiped them all out." "Their captain's gone, and most of their best split off like Whitebeard. But there's still some holdouts flying their flag." Roger gave them all a manic grin and asked, I'm up for burning another rock pirate flag. How about you boys? A resounding cheer answered him, and the pirates ran for their battle stations. Some loaded cannons and aimed them out the starboard, while others readied boarding planks and grappling hooks. Izuku threaded his way through the crowd until he came up to Gold Roger. Once the pirate captain turned towards him, Izuku asked, "Are we getting dropped off at this island?" Gold Roger guffawed and said, "Here, I'm not that heartless. Whiskey Peaks is an old pirate haven. You'd be lucky to make it off that rock with your friend. Besides, she's not even awake yet." Izuku peered out towards that island. "So, those pirates, are they villains?" "Yes." Roger had a grave look on his face. "Any chance you've heard of the rock pirates in your future?" "Nope." "Good." Gold Roger drew his sword and smiled at the distant islands. "Why don't you stay with your friend? You can help keep her safe while we take care of these assholes." Izuku nodded gratefully and ran for the only room he could consistently find on the ship. Crocus nearly shoved him out of the room, but the doctor tussed and sat back down when Izuku explained, "If you're stuck with me, then you could at least grind up some poultices. We'll need them after this fight." Crocus pointed, and Izuku opened the cabinet. Fresh and dried herbs were crammed in bundles, alongside jars of oil and fat. Izuku pulled out one bundle and examined the thick, broad leaves in his hands. "This is aloe vera, right? Is this for burns?" Crocus raised an eyebrow. "You know a thing or two about medicine." "A bit," Izuku trailed off. "I got into a lot of scrapes when I was younger. I was clumsy." Crocus' eyes narrowed, and he stood next to Izuku's shoulder as he crushed leaf after leaf into a stone mortar. "Grind in some turmeric. Prevents infection," Izuku said as he added in a dash of yellow powder. "Good. It's not the best, but it keeps well on voyages." A thunderous boom shook the walls. Izuku flinched at the sound. He tensed up as the cannon shots continued. "Focus," Crocus said. "Now, finally mince some tear bomb." Izuku paused. "I haven't heard that one before. Best herb to have in an apothecary. Acts as a performance enhancer for everything else in the mixture. Always mix it in after the main ingredients, but before any filler." Under Crocus' guidance, Izuku pulled out a handful of light, airy grass, pale blue and silky smooth against his fingers. The moment he took a knife to it, beads of resin welled up around the cuts, and the grass seemed to shrink in on itself. "Quickly now," Crocus said hurriedly. "Don't let it disappear on you." Izuku made some hasty cuts, and the tear bomb practically melted. The resin left behind formed a soft, gelatinous blob on the counter that jiggled at the slightest touch. "Always make sure your hands are clean when handling tear bomb," Crocus warned. "It enhances everything, including contaminants. You could poison someone with a pinch of iron powder if you're not careful." Izuku scooped the gel into the mortar and mashed it gently into the aloe vera. A potent whiff of turmeric drifted from the pestle once he stopped. "Wait until the gel loses its luster. Then mix in some tallow. We'll coat bandages in it once they get back." After 2 minutes, the shiny patches of the paste lost their luster. Izuku opened a jar and mixed it in. "Won't adding fat make the paste weaker?" Izuku asked. "It does. That's why we use tear bomb first." Crocus brought out a fresh jar, and Izuku carefully pushed the cream inside. Another cabinet held wound strips of linen, and while they weren't as stringy and tough as gauze, Izuku fell into the familiar habit of cutting out bandages. "You know," Crocus said, "you'd make a half-decent doctor if you put your mind to it." Thanks." Izuku blushed under the compliment and searched for something to say. "Is May going to be okay?" Crocus let out a deep sigh as he cut another strip. "Kid, when was the last time she got some sleep?" "At least a week." "Why?" "Yep, that would do it." Crocus glanced at Izuku's stricken face and said, "Don't get so worked up. She's sleeping. She'll probably wake up in a day or two. Oh, thanks for, you can thank me by cutting more bandages. Better to have them ready before pirates are bleeding all over the place." A loud thump came from the door. Crocus grumbled as he got out of his chair. "Someone better be dying out there," Crocus shouted as he flung open the door. A grinning, unkempt man holding a club over his head greeted him. "There sure is," the pirate cheerfully replied. "You are." The club fell. Crocus let out a pained grunt and fell sideways onto a bed. The pirate sauntered in, followed by a lanky, sallow man with a hook nose and a short woman with a dagger in each hand. "Rats, no treasure," a pirate groused. His eyes slid over to May, and he grinned. "But Sleeping Beauty over there might do. Help me with her, will you?" As they approached May, Izuku snapped out of his terror. He grabbed the mortar off the counter and hurled it at them. The stone bounced off a pirate's head. "KK, keep your hands off her," Izuku stammered. The pirate rubbed the spot where the stone had struck him. "Little kids shouldn't throw things at people. That kinda hurt, you know." The other pirates cackled at his insult. Izuku flinched as the club whistled through the air in front of him. He hunted for anything else to defend himself with. His eyes went to the knife, with beads of tear balm still coating on the blade. But the pirate knocked it aside with a lazy flick of his club. Out of any other options, Izuku raised his fists and inched forward. The pirate grinned down at him and asked, "We're really doing this? Don't say I didn't warn you." Before his fear could get the better of him, Izuku let out a yell and charged forward. He barely started swinging his fist when the club slammed him into the shoulder and flung him into a cabinet. The wood splintered against his back, and he landed on bundles of leaves. A shard of wood dug into his back, scraping against a rib, and Izuku screamed, "Why don't you lie down? I'm sure your doctor can fix you right up." Another pirate stage whispered, "Didn't you knock their doctor on the head?" "Whoops, I guess you're right, silly me." As the pirates laughed at him, Izuku brushed away tears. His eyes stung, far more than the tears should have, and he saw a string of dried peppers hanging over him. His hand clenched and closed around a tuft of tear balm. A wild, desperate idea struck him. In one hand, he mashed the peppers together. In the other, he crushed the grass until beads of resin welled up between his fingers. He combined the crushed herbs together, then wrenched open a jar and tossed it inside. After a quick shake, he opened the jar and stood up. The pirates, halfway out the door with May, paused to look at him. With a wild shout, Izuku hurled the oil at them. He aimed for their eyes, but the oil never made it that high. It splashed all over their chest and arms. "Ha!" The pirates lowered May and brandished their weapons. "You got guts, kid, but you really should have stayed down." One of the pirates looked down at their hands. "Hey guys, what was that stuff? My hand's itching." The others looked down at themselves. Wherever the oil touched them, their skin quickly turned red. As the blotches darkened, the pirates fidgeted and tried scraping it off. "Ah, get it off, get it off. Water, get some water." One pirate wiped at their forehead. Their face turned red wherever their fingers passed. "It's in my eyes, my fucking eyes." Izuku felt his own hands stinging and saw his palms changing color. Hyperventilating as the pain seared its way up his arms, Izuku groped through the herbs until he found aloe vera. He crushed it in his hands, mixing it with the tear balm still coating his fingers, and felt near instant relief. The pirates proved less fortunate. Blisters formed where the oil had touched them, while red patches spread through contact across their body. One pirate howled and threw themselves overboard as their eyes turned red, while another tried rubbing the oil off, only spreading it further in the process. The third pirate, however, had eyes only for Izuku. He smashed a bedpost with his club and sauntered towards Izuku. You little shit. You know, I was going to let you sit there and watch us carry off your little lady friend. But now, I'm going to crack your skull like an egg and scramble everything inside. As Izuku saw the club rise high over him, he could only stare. Every part of him screamed to roll out of the way, to keep fighting. But Izuku knew he couldn't. He was quirkless, weak. Even being clever with the peppers didn't do anything. Gum gum, pistol. A shout from outside the cabin made the pirate look. A fist stretched into the room and clocked him in the face. Seconds later, Luffy wandered in. He nudged the unconscious pirate with his foot. "Hey, do I have to drop you off at a marine base?" Luffy asked. "I don't feel like doing that again." Izuku shakily rose to his feet. "And no, that's fine. Thanks." "Sure. Now, give me meat, shishishi." The other pirate shook himself and let out a yell as he charged Luffy. Luffy bent in half sideways, tripped the man with his outstretched leg, then punched him so hard in the back he flew overboard. "You're not meat, silly." With a groan, Crocus stirred in the bed. He sat up and rubbed at his bleeding temple. "That's what I get for sailing aboard a pirate ship. Stupid Roger. Why, you're alive." "Yes, I'm alive," Crocus snapped. "It'd take more than a love tap on my head to put me under. Now, clean up this mess you made. And if you get that cursed chili oil of yours anywhere near me, I'm making you lick it up. Got it?" By the time Izuku finished cleaning up, Whiskey Peaks was merrily burning, and the Roger pirates hauled sacks of money and barrels of alcohol onto the ship. The wounded trailed into the room, and Crocus pressed Izuku into service, tying bandages and scrubbing wounds, even stitching an arm under the doctor's watchful eye. Hours later, Izuku was covered in blood, dead on his feet, and itching like mad from a speck of oil he had missed. Roger strode into the room and gave everyone inside a once-over. He smiled at Izuku and said, "Heard you fended off a few pirates. Nice work." I didn't do anything." "Not really," Izuku protested. "Luffy's the one that beat them up." "I dunno. I'd fear your chili oil of doom a lot more than a fist to the face." Gold Roger chuckled and said, "You did well for your first time." "But I didn't do enough," Izuku shouted. "I just sat there and watched while he was going to kill me." Gold Roger shrugged. "Well, you're still alive. Just don't do that next time and you'll be fine." The pirate captain turned away. Izuku hesitated, then reached out and grabbed his coat. I want to learn how to protect people, so please teach me." Gold Roger glanced back. "You sure you want to? It won't be easy." "I'll do whatever it takes." After a short pause, as if listening to something only he could hear, he said, "You and Luffy can train with Rayleigh then." Izuku stood for a moment in disbelief as the captain left. Then he pumped a fist. Hope bloomed inside of him. Roger didn't think he was crazy. He said he could do it, right? Crocus whacked him on the back of the head. "Are you going to help me clean up or not?" Izuku's day started with a bucket of water before the sun rose and went downhill from there. Sopping wet, with a chuckling buggy trailing behind him, Izuku went above deck and met with Rayleigh. Roger's first mate gave a raised eyebrow at Izuku's thin arms and gangly frame and told him to swab the deck. With a bucket in one hand and a mop in the other, Izuku joined the other cabin boys in pressing salt water into the deck. Shanks gave him pointers, while Luffy drooled and mumbled about meat, half asleep even as his arms moved. Rayleigh watched them while they worked. After seeing Luffy's arms stretched to cover the entire deck, he came over with a pair of handcuffs. "You haven't built any muscle for a while, have you?" he asked Luffy. "Wear these." The moment Luffy touched them, he sagged down to his knees. Tongue lolling, Luffy panted, "It's so heavy." See, Prism Stone is any devil fruit's greatest weakness. Learn to work through it. and you'll grow even stronger." At any other time, Izuku would have mumbled theories about the foreign terminology. But the burning numbness in his arms made Izuku blind and deaf to everything that wasn't the slosh of water on the wooden boards and the squelching noises of his heavy, sopping wet mop squeezing the dirt out of the wood. "Don't be stingy with the water," Rayleigh told Izuku. "It keeps the ship watertight and stops mushrooms from growing. The wrong mushroom out in the Grand Line can kill an entire crew." With a swig from a bottle, Rayleigh added, "Or worse." Izuku felt the difference where he walked. Dry planks rattled under his feet, moving ever so slightly, while the soaked boards hummed, stuck in place. "Aw, this is boring," Luffy roared and kicked his bucket. It landed on Buggy's head, and the cabin boy tried to stab him. "When are we going to fight?" Rayleigh cuffed him on the back of the head. "Doesn't matter how well you can fight if you fall over after 5 minutes. Now keep scrubbing. Give me any more lip, and I'll make you swab with your feet." "Ooh, that sounds fun." Luffy did a handstand and grabbed the mop with his toes. After a few minutes, Luffy collapsed on his back, panting and exhausted. "Ugh, everything hurts." Lying down next to his fellow time traveler, Izuku had to agree. Getting beat up by Bakugo hurt, but the muscle-burning exhaustion in every fiber of his body transcended any pain he had ever known before. A shadow loomed over them. Izuku gulped as he looked up at Rayleigh's bemused face. "It's not nap time yet, little shrimps. Or are you giving up already?" The thought of giving up crossed his mind. It's not like cleaning ships or hauling barrels would give him a quirk. As he lay there, staring up at Rayleigh, he remembered the pirate with a club, remembered nearly dying, remembered watching as they carried May out the door. Gritting his teeth, Izuku swung onto shaking feet and stood trembling before the first mate. I'll keep going," Izuku panted. "Looks like you got some spine after all." He nudged Luffy with a foot. "What about you?" Luffy scowled at him and crossed his arms. "This is boring, and I'm starving. Let me know when there's something to punch." Rayleigh shrugged and removed the cuffs. "Suit yourself." Groaning and flexing his sore arms, Luffy wandered off in search of meat. Rayleigh turned his gaze towards Izuku and grinned. "Seeing that I haven't scared you away yet, why don't we move on to some real training?" "You mean this wasn't training?" Izuku asked, exasperated. "Oh, it was. But you won't be pushing pirates around by swabbing decks all day. Let's see how well you can throw a punch." A small crowd of Roger's crew formed a ring around them as Izuku and Shanks squared up against each other. Izuku stood tense, fists balled up in front of him and fidgeting on his feet. Shanks, meanwhile, stretched his arms and leaned back. "Don't go too hard on him," Rayleigh warned. "I want to see what we're working with first." "Sure," Shanks said. "Go on, Izuku. Let's see how hard you can hit me." "Why you sure?" Izuku asked. "I got slapped by a sea king once. Whatever you got, I can take it." Izuku edged forward, watching for any sign of movement. Shanks didn't even watch him come closer. Once he was within reach, Izuku wound back a fist and flung it at Shanks. To his utter surprise, the cabin boy didn't even try blocking it. Izuku's wrist throbbed from the impact, and Izuku backed away, hissing in pain. "Hey," Shanks said, rubbing his cheek. "I'd give that one a 4. "A 4? One pirate bellowed. "I've seen feathers hit harder than that." "A 4 for effort," Shanks added. He threw his weight into it. "Lad's 90 pounds soaking wet. Not much weight to throw around. PFFT, I could have dodged that in my sleep." Izuku felt his cheeks flush as the crowd threw more insults at him. Rayleigh shook his head and said, "You've never punched someone before, have you?" "And no, sir," Izuku stammered. Rayleigh rolled his eyes. "Kids these days. Well, I guess you're from the future, so this generation gets a pass. You telegraphed that punch too much, and you hurt your wrist by angling it. Punches need to be a short, Quick snap like this. Rayleigh's fist blurred an inch from his face. Izuku yelped, stumbled back, and fell on his ass, to the laughter and jeering of the crew. Blushing, Izuku leapt back to his feet and copied the punch. Better. Now, let's see what happens if Shanks tries dodging. Izuku stepped forward more boldly this time. He threw a feint, and Shanks didn't even blink at it. Izuku's next punch snapped out. Shanks leaned aside, and the quick jab missed him by a mile. Surprised, Izuku overextended and leaned forward. Just before Izuku fell, Shanks pressed a fist into his gut, knocking the wind out of him without applying any force on his part. Izuku fell to a knee and gasped for air. "Wow, you don't have any muscle on you," Shanks remarked. "Guess that means you're on barrel duty for a while." True to Shanks' words, after some more light sparring and a couple bruises from Shanks' half-hearted counters, Rayleigh set Izuku to hauling barrels of fish, pickled vegetables, and water from below deck. Already sore from earlier, Izuku felt as though his arms would explode every time he hefted a barrel over his shoulder. Sweat matted his hair, and his shirt was drenched by the time the chef told him to grab a seat for dinner. After a whole day without eating, Izuku's stomach howled at the first whiff of roasted fish. But once again, Izuku found himself stymied by the speed and violence with which the pirates ate. He watched, helpless, as food arrived and disappeared before his chopsticks could even come close to the tiniest morsel. Izuku's hands shook as he watched food vanish before his eyes. Drool dribbled down his chin, and his thoughts slipped away until all that remained was the maddening hunger driving a stake through his gut. Izuku dropped his chopsticks. His hand darted at the nearest pile of food like a python and grabbed a handful of meat. He swallowed. His eyes went wide as the food lodged in his throat. As he panicked and clawed at the table, Shanks gave him a hearty slap on the back. 2 chicken wings clattered onto his plate. When Izuku went to eat them more slowly, rubbery hands snatched them up. Luffy swallowed them, bones and all. Put off by the near-death experience, dinner came and went before Izuku could work up the courage to seize another morsel. Izuku groaned as he rose from his chair, every muscle stiff and aching. He followed the crowd outside and saw Crocus waiting for him on the deck. "Your friend's up." Hunger and aches forgotten, Izuku sprinted towards Crocus' room. Mei tore into a biscuit with her teeth as Izuku sat down next to her. "Are you feeling all right?" Izuku asked. "Starving. And bored. Grumpy doctor won't let me out of bed." "That's because you'll fall over before you take 5 steps, Crocus retorted. "Now, what do you remember, Izuku? I'll need your help making sure she isn't missing any memories." "We used the time machine, right? I remember a truck." "Yeah, we made it back just before we hit it." Mei looked thoughtfully around the room. "Are you sure we didn't hit it? I thought I hit my head." I guess we did. But the DeLorean didn't have a dent in it. So maybe it was going back that did it." Izuku told her the rest of what happened, including the second trip back, landing on a ship, and going up a mountain. Hey old guy," Hatsum said cheerily. "Piss off. I'm not old yet." "Yes you are. Anyways, where are we?" Crocus glowered and rummaged in his cabinet for his most bitter herbs. "Just past Whiskey Peaks in Paradise." "And where is that?" "The Grand Line." "And where is that?" Crocus looked at her like she was crazy. "The Grand Line is the Grand Line, girl. Don't tell me you've never heard of it." He finished making a tincture and offered it to her. "Drink that, and don't complain." Hatsum drank it down and clicked her tongue. Could use a bit more of a kick." "Oh, I'll give you a bit more of a kick. Is your tongue made of steel, girl?" "I wish it was. Then I could mount a rocket launcher on it." Izuku put a hand on her shoulder. "Mei, don't get any ideas." "Aw, come on. You know it'd be cool. Your head would explode." "As amusing as this conversation is," Crocus cut in, I have better things to do than listen to you two lovebirds. Either help me with some poultices, Izuku, or you can turn your body to mush with Rayleigh. As Crocus guided Izuku through the process of making a painkiller out of tree bark, Hatsume checked her phone. Hey, how come we don't have any service? Aren't we only 20 years in the past? 40, Izuku said. 2 jumps, remember? Izuku, the satellites are centuries old. Did you never check your phone? I lost mine. You didn't try to borrow anyone else's. No one has one. There's no electronics at all on this ship. They're really committed to the pirate aesthetic for a group of vigilantes. That, or we're in a completely different world. Izuku's brain crashed, and the little IT person in his head threw their hands up and stormed out. Another world, Izuku dully echoed. We hit a truck, Hatsume pointed out. How does that make any sense? It's the ultimate isekai trope. At Izuku's uncomprehending expression, Hatsume added, You know, guy gets hit by truck, enters another world, and gets a harem of highly marketable anime girls. As Izuku rebooted his brain and reviewed everything he had experienced, he saw the logic of Hatsume's deduction. No technology or knowledge of it. No knowledge of Japan despite speaking Japanese. Impossible plants and geography that defies physics. We're in another world, Izuku croaked. Looks like it, Hatsume said brightly. Izuku put his heads in his hands. We're doomed. Nah, getting back will be super easy. Barely an inconvenience. Izuku gave her a baleful glower from between his fingers. I'll ignore that obscure reference in favor of asking how we're getting back. It couldn't be simpler, Izuku. All we need to do is make a truck and run into it. Izuku sighed in exasperation and asked, What if that just takes us to yet another world? Then we keep doing it until we find our world. That, or we find something along the way to help us aim. Hatsume smothered a yawn and moved her blankets. In fact, I should get on that right now. Got a few parts in the trunk I can tinker around with, and… Prompted by Hatsume's yawning, Izuku echoed her. Crocus gently pushed her onto the bed and pulled up the sheets. As exciting and existentially terrifying it has been listening to you two catch up, you both need to sleep. But babies. But nothing. I'll let you out in the morning. As for you, Crocus said, examining the way Izuku's body sagged in on itself. Don't overdo it. Tear a muscle, and I'll give you the nastiest tincture I can make. Got it. Got it, Izuku said around a yawn. His feet felt like lead, and the wooden boards of the deck looked more and more tempting to lie on. But Izuku fought back his exhaustion. As he walked, his thoughts drifted away from the hammock waiting for him, and towards the revelation that he was no longer in his own world. Before, he might have been 55, but he would have seen his mother again. Now, he could live 1,000 years and never see her again. He paused before the door down to the below-deck's quarters. Before, he had felt exhausted down to his bone marrow, wrung out like a dish rag and limp from lack of food. But now his body tingled with restless energy, fueled by anxiety and helplessness. A desperate, overpowering need to do something, anything, set aflame every cell of his body. But what could he do? As much of a knack for electronics Izuku had picked up as Hatsume's errand boy, he couldn't make a calculator, let alone devices meant to shatter the bounds of space and time. So, what could he do? Izuku's eyes drifted to the piles of cannonballs, still lying above deck after their clash with the rock pirates. When he put his hands around one and tried to lift it, a fresh surge of agony crackled through his body like a rogue thunderbolt, bouncing off his ribs like a xylophone and hurtling straight into his brain. Izuku flinched away and gasped for air as his whole body shook and sweat poured down his face. Izuku took one step back. May, bloodied, slumped over the wheel of the DeLorean, appeared before his eye. Another step. 3 pirates hauled her out of bed. Another. A wooden club, still dripping with crocus blood, towering over him. Izuku stopped, turned. The cannonball shone in the pale moonlight, its mottled surface riddled with shadowy pockmarks. Izuku ran his fingers over it, felt the cold iron against his feverish skin. He lifted. Again, his body screamed, but this time, Izuku shut out its agonized voice. He lifted and felt the clumsy weight of the cannonball leave the deck. Step. His shoulders creaked, and his legs wobbled. Step. Izuku's teeth clenched, and the veins in his neck bulged out. Step. His foot slipped. Izuku's knee slammed on the deck, but he kept the cannonball off the ground. Screaming through gritted teeth, Izuku put his foot back under him and took another step. 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 Izuku's world shrank to the wood beneath his feet and the iron in his hands. Blood dripped from his fingers as the rough metal ripped his skin. Muscles tore as Izuku pushed them well past their limits. His bones creaked as every movement brought them to the brink of cracking. But Izuku kept walking, step by step. Izuku took another step forward and hit something. Shocked out of his trance, Izuku looked around. He had reached the other end of the deck, and the cannonball had tapped the railing. At his feet was an empty box for cannonballs. He stared numbly at the spot for a moment before setting down his burden. The moment the weight left him, Izuku experienced a moment of relief, of euphoria, so overwhelming that Izuku stopped to bask in it. To breathe. To feel the radiant afterimage of fire and pain that warmed every muscle from his toes to his neck. For the first time in his life, Izuku Midoriya felt well and truly alive. He exulted in every twitch of his muscles, every beat of his heart, the swish of air through his throat and lungs. After an eternity and a second, Izuku turned around. A mountain of cannonballs loomed on the other side of the ship. Looking back at that one cannonball Izuku had moved, his accomplishment suddenly felt small and silly. Yet, it had lit a fire in Izuku's heart. A burning, smoldering sensation urged Izuku's feet forward. He picked up another cannonball, walked back, set it next to the other one. Izuku's body broke itself, piece by piece. Skin tore, muscle fibers snapped, and bone cracked. And piece by piece, Izuku's body rebuilt itself. Skin scabbed over, muscles regrew, and bones fused back together. Each time Izuku's body weathered the cycle of the phoenix, it grew ever so slightly stronger. After the third cannonball, Izuku held them at waist height. By the sixth, Izuku carried them over one shoulder. After 10, Izuku carried 2 at once. Izuku fell asleep at one point, mid-stride, and woke to find another 6 cannonballs in his pile. And all the while, the fire in Izuku's chest burned hotter and hotter, burned away his fears and doubts until nothing remained. As the sun rose, Izuku carried the last cannonball. His arms quivered, and his legs bent awkwardly under the burden. But the metal felt light in his hands. A door opened. Gold Roger strode out onto the deck. He watched as Izuku heaved the last cannonball high in the air and set it down atop the pyramid. Izuku stopped, looked between the pile at his feet and the empty box 50 feet away. Then he saw Roger, lit by the rising sun. In the captain's eyes, Izuku saw the same fire that burned in his chest. Gold Roger grinned and turned away. As the captain left, Izuku felt a smile stretch his own lips. Izuku wolfed down breakfast with a fervor that made the other pirates nod in respect. A whole boiled egg, shell and all, disappeared with a crunch. Fishbones ground to powder between his teeth, and he drank down an entire boat of gravy. "Wow, Rayleigh's working him to the bone," one pirate said. "Lab looks ready to blow away in a stiff breeze. Gotta give the kid credit. He's putting in the work. We'll make a pirate out of him yet." Back on deck, Rayleigh waited for him. Buggy and Shanks were already hauling barrels, and Izuku moved to join them. Rayleigh stepped in his path. "Am I doing something else?" Izuku asked. Like moving cannonballs, Izuku thought back to the night, and horror struck them. "Oh no," Was I not supposed to move them? I'll move them all back right away. Rayleigh put one finger on Izuku's forehead and pushed. Izuku let out a yelp as he landed on the deck, his entire body limp and aching as though he had ground every cell into hamburger. Oh, sorry for whatever I did. Rayleigh shook his head. I thought you were supposed to be the smart one. Huh? Izuku asked. What did I do wrong? Take a look at your arms. Izuku looked down. His arms were sticky with dried blood, and they had shrunken down so much he could see his bones sticking out. Izuku turned pale as he examined the rest of him. Ribs stuck out of his emaciated chest, and his legs looked like toothpicks. By contrast, his belly stuck out like a giant balloon and jiggled with each breath he took. Oh God, what did I do? Relax, kid, you'll be fine. Rayleigh patted him on the shoulder. Eat, sleep, and you'll be fit to fight a Marine captain in the morning. Izuku gave him an incredulous look, but he felt too tired to fight the advice. All right, Izuku said sleepily. Guess I'll lie down then. Not right here, Rayleigh snapped as Izuku wobbled on his feet. I'll let Crocus deal with you. The small shiver of fear Izuku felt woke him enough to make it to Crocus' room. The doctor took one look at Izuku's emaciated frame and smacked him on the head with a bundle of herbs. You idiot. You're lucky all your bones are in one piece. Am I going to be okay? Should have asked that before you spent the whole night hauling half your weight in cannonballs. At Izuku's horrified expression, Crocus snorted and said, You'll live. What kind of doctor would I be if I couldn't treat something so simple? He ground together 2 sets of herbs and steeped them in boiling water. Once it cooled, he handed Izuku a cup. Within seconds of drinking it, Izuku felt his eyelids drooping. When Izuku woke up again, the fire still smoldered in his chest. Izuku leapt out of bed, brimming with energy. He rushed out before Crocus could stop him and grabbed the nearest barrel. He heaved, and for a triumphant moment, lifted the barrel smoothly off the ground. Then gravity objected, and Izuku found himself crumpling under his own body weight in fish. Rayleigh lifted the barrel off him with one hand. What, spent a whole night moving rocks around and think you're invincible? Izuku sheepishly took the hand offered him and went to lift more reasonable weights. Days passed. May holed up in the cargo hold with the DeLorean, while Izuku kept training. The barrels grew steadily heavier. Shanks started dodging his punches, and he even lasted a few minutes sparring against Buggy. Izuku learned to climb the rigging, tie knots, haul fishing nets, and clean the bilges. Days spent in the sun tanned his skin, and calluses grew on his palms. By night, he moved cannonballs. Never to the point where he resembled a skeleton, but he couldn't sleep without working himself to exhaustion. Once Rayleigh realized that Izuku wasn't stopping anytime soon, Rayleigh set him to bringing cannonballs upstairs. He nearly put a hole in the deck one time he tripped, and half the crew cussed him out for waking them up. He dropped another on his toe, and Crocus practically force-fed him a numbing agent that killed all sense of taste for 2 days with its bitterness. His labors drew a few curious glances. Buggy muttered about how crazy he was under his breath, while Shanks joined him for a few trips, chatting about places he saw and asking Izuku more about his home in return. Other pirates coaxed him into carrying more and bet on how far he'd make it with 6 cannonballs strapped to his back. Crocus laid into all of them when he found out. Luffy watched as well, humming and scratching his head in confusion. After about a week, Luffy stomped up and put himself in Izuku's path. Why are you doing this? Luffy asked. Izuku blinked. He tried to think, but a reason eluded him. Why was he lugging cannonballs? What was the point? It wasn't as though it would help him go home. It probably wouldn't even help him be a hero. Probably wouldn't. But Izuku clung to that tiny sliver of a chance. And so, he said, I want to be a hero. Luffy's head tilted to one side. And why do you want to do that? That question made Izuku's thoughts stop in their tracks. Why wouldn't I? It's the right thing to do. Luffy stuck out his tongue. Blah. You sound like my grandpa. Is that really the only reason? Izuku wanted to say no. Yet, a small, niggling part of his brain told him the truth. He wanted more than that. He wanted. I want to be like All Might. At Luffy's blank stare, Izuku added, he's amazing. He's saved hundreds of people and beat tons of villains. His casualty rate is nearly 0, and he's been voted #1 for 12 years. Boring, Luffy shouted as Izuku started rambling. And protecting everybody sounds like a ton of work. That's like a lot of people. And heroes don't get meat. They don't? Nope. Heroes are supposed to share. That's what heroes do. Other people take their meat, and they never get any. That's why I'm not being a hero. I want all the meat. I guess I don't mind getting any, as long as I got to save people. Nope, don't wanna. You don't have anyone you want to protect? Izuku asked. Luffy paused. One hand rose to his straw hat, and he picked at a mended cut. I have my friends. My crew. But I'm plenty strong already. I beat up this one shark guy, and this one super fast cat guy with sharp claws. So, I guess that's okay. Luffy stepped aside, and Izuku trotted past with his cannonball. As he rounded a corner, Luffy's neck stretched past him, nearly making Izuku drop it. Everyone in my crew has a dream, Luffy said. What's yours? I want to be a hero. Nope. Too boring. Being a hero's easy. Don't you want to be more than that? Izuku stopped, considered. And that tiny flame in his chest whispered to him. He could be a hero, with that tiny sliver of a chance. So, wasn't there a sliver of a sliver that he could be more? I want to be the #1 hero. The best. Good. Louder. Izuku coughed and looked around. Then he raised his voice. I want to be the #1 hero. Say you will. I will be the #1 hero. Luffy grinned. Cool. Good luck with that. Luffy's head whipped back to his shoulders. Izuku kept going another few steps, then looked down at the cannonball. He left it on the stairs and ran for Rayleigh. Hey, see, Rayleigh, are there any weights? Rayleigh rolled his eyes. You can play around later. You're getting your first taste of action today. Izuku looked out. An island, comprised of a cluster of snow-capped plateaus, had a pirate flag waving over its harbor. An enormous vessel shaped like a white whale was beached on its shore. More villains? Izuku asked. In response, Rayleigh only said, Whitebeard. Izuku felt as though he were about to throw up everything he had eaten in the past year, and it had nothing to do with the rocking of the waves. Looking a bit green around the gills, a pirate said as they rowed toward shore. Though that could just be the hair. Why, yeah, maybe. Shanks elbowed Izuku in the ribs. Relax. Just stick with us and punch anyone you don't recognize. Yeah, Buggy added. Don't worry. You're probably not going to die. Izuku looked forlornly back at the Oro Jackson as it weighed anchor within sight of the wintry shores. The boat he currently rowed in, a rickety wooden rowboat that leaked a bit in the front, pitched and heaved as they broke through the ocean's waves. As they approached the snowy beach of the Drum Islands, Izuku calculated his odds of making it back to the Oro Jackson and compared them to his odds of surviving a D-Day Normandy invasion, Ice Guy pirate style. Halfway into the water, Izuku felt a rubbery hand grab him by the collar. Luffy pulled him back in, now dripping wet and still facing impending doom. Do you jump off every boat you get into? Luffy asked. Silly Izuku, you're supposed to stay inside. The pirate rowing chuckled and said, Lad's so eager to get in his first real fight, he tried to swim for shore. Izuku shivered and tried not to stare at the pirate flag looming over him. Whitebeard's Jolly Roger, a skull with a crescent mustache, fluttered high and proud over the Moby Dick. The whale-shaped vessel looked large enough to swallow their dinky rowboat and pick its teeth with an anchor. The boat lurched as it rammed into the shoreline. Dozens of boats made landfall around them, and the pirates leaping from them brandished swords, knives, and axes. Izuku hesitated, but Luffy dragged him along, forcing him to run or get dragged through the snow. As the Roger pirates grouped up, Izuku asked, "What's the plan? Are we going to sneak up on them somehow? Set their boat on fire while they're distracted? Use aerokinesis to siphon the oxygen out of their air until they pass out?" The pirates ignored him. As one, they raised their weapons and shouted, "Whitebeard, are you going to cower in your hidey hole all day? Or are you going to face us like a real pirate?" Izuku looked upon the cheering pirate horde with a sense of dawning horror. Why did they sneak in on rowboats when they were going to shout out where they were? The Whitebeard pirates emerged from taverns and bars, smirking as they hefted weapons of their own. Their commanders stepped forward, leaving a gap at the center. Izuku gulped and shrank behind Luffy as he saw their captain emerge. As grand and imposing as All Might, but with none of his friendly veneer, Whitebeard strode to the front of his crew with a massive Naginata leaning over his shoulder. He gave the Roger pirates a dismissive glance and asked, "Did Roger get lost again?" A pirate shouted back, "Wouldn't be much of a fight if Roger mopped the floor with you all. Thought we'd make things a bit more even." Whitebeard raised an eyebrow. "You lot? I've scraped tougher stuff off my toenails this morning." "Well, if it's a fight you want, who am I to deny you?" He pointed his Naginata forward and shouted, "Give them hell, my sons." The Whitebeard pirates ran forward with a triumphant shout. Not to be outdone, the Roger pirates raised their own battle cry and rushed to meet them. Swept up in the masses, Izuku rushed forward with the rest of them and braced for impact. The two forces collided with a sickening thud of fist on face and the clang of steel against steel, rippling along the battle line as pirates struck and fell. Izuku had a few extra merciful seconds to write a will in his head before the pirates in front of him got flung away by a steel club the size of his leg. Izuku yelped and ducked as the slab of metal crashed through the air above him. The shockwave knocked Izuku off his feet, winding him as he rolled across the churned snow. "Well, look at you," the pirate drawled as he hefted the impossibly large mace in one hand. "All skin and bones, this one. Are you really a member of Roger's crew? Or did you get lost on your way back from school, little kid?" Before Izuku could tell the pirate that, yes, he had gotten very lost after leaving school, and could he please not splatter him like a house fly, a fist stretched out of nowhere and slammed the man in the face. The pirate didn't even budge as he brushed the hand off his jaw. "Hoy!" Luffy shouted. "I'm going to kick your ass." "A devil fruit? Now that's more like it." As Luffy flung himself at the other pirate, Izuku took the opportunity to sprint away from the fighting. He found a clearing off to the side, with a couple dozen pirates either groaning or unconscious. Shanks and Buggy stood back to back, weapons raised, as three Whitebeard pirates closed in around them. "Hey Izuku," Shanks shouted and waved. "Just in time. Why don't we make this an even fight?" Izuku froze, torn between running away and trying to help. Before he could make up his mind, a plume of blue flame shot in front of him. A grinning face with tufts of yellow hair emerged from the fire. "Oh, you're new," the fiery pirate said. "I'm Marco, and you are?" Izuku yelped as a fiery fist leapt at his face. Ducking sideways on instinct, Izuku sprinted away, only to see blue light flickering in his peripheral vision. He dove, and blue fire rushed overhead. "Hey, come on, no running now. Aren't you a pirate?" Izuku tried to tell him no, but the words tumbled out in an incomprehensible jumble like a collapsed Jenga tower. His mind raced as he clumsily rose to his feet. Thoughts of running crossed his mind, but the ocean waves were 100 feet back. He wouldn't make it a tenth of the way. He looked around, but the other pirates had left the area, leaving him and Marco with an empty clearing. Heart pounding, Izuku raised his fists and watched his opponent warily. Strong and silent type? Marco asked. Cool, I get it. All right then, here I come. Fiery feathers sprouted from Marco's arms, and his feet grew avian talons. With a rush of hot air, melting the snow around them, Marco leapt, wings flapping and talons aimed at Izuku's chest. Izuku twirled sideways. Fire stung his cheeks as Marco's wings passed by. Steadying himself, Izuku searched for an opening. But as he stared at his opponent, Izuku had a grim realization. Marco's entire body was wreathed in blue flame. Even if he could punch him, Izuku would only burn his hands. Searching the sands around them, Izuku saw the glint of metal. Fallen swords, axes, and pistols lay half buried in the mushy sand. On Marco's second charge, Izuku rolled, grabbed a pistol, and brought it up. The gunshot hurt his ears, and the knockback made his wrist twinge painfully. Marco stared down at the neat, round hole in his chest. Right through the heart, he said. Nice shot. Swallowing down his nerves, Izuku tossed the pistol aside. Marco's face shifted, sprouting a long, slender beak and blue feathers. Even as Izuku frantically scavenged for another weapon, he marveled at the utility and diversity of Marco's quirk. Flight, fires, shapeshifting, and impermeability. That would give All Might a run for his money. Izuku's fingers closed around a hilt. He heaved and pulled a notched sword out of the muck. Holding it unsteadily in front of him, Izuku panted and waited for Marco to make his move. You don't know how to use that, do you? Marco asked, his avian face tilted sideways. Guess we'll make this quick then. Marco vanished. Izuku yelped as a blue blur raced in front of him and kicked the sword out of his hands. A second foot struck him across the cheek. Izuku tasted blood as he crouched in the sand. Marco stood over him. Heat washed over Izuku as he looked up at him. Marco smiled sadly down at him, fist raised, and said, You better get stronger for our rematch, all right? Izuku felt the fire stir within him as he looked up at his imminent defeat. The moment Marco's fist fell, Izuku sprang with a snarl. His own fist darted forward and slammed into Marco's chest. The fires parted around Izuku's wrist. His skin turned red and twinged painfully as it burned. But Izuku held his fist there. No hacky? Marco asked. Shame. You would have gotten me with that. Izuku tried to back away, but Marco's chest closed around his fist. Izuku yanked, then punched at Marco's face. His features blurred into fire as Izuku's hand passed harmlessly through him. Night-night, Greenie. Marco cocked a fist back, then swore and ducked aside. A shining black knife dug into Marco's side, drawing a long, bloody gash. Buggy's hand, clutching the bloody dagger, sailed back to its owner. Shanks sauntered up with him, brandishing two swords and grinning despite the gash bleeding down his thigh. Hey, no fair, Marco shouted. We were just wrapping up. We're pirates, Shanks shot back. When do we ever play fair? Buggy gulped at the sight of Marco's flames and whispered back. Are you sure about this? He's a Loja. Mythical Zoan, actually, Marco said with a grin. But fine. You two want to play? Let's play. Before Izuku could even understand what was happening, Marco disappeared, practically teleporting in front of Shanks with how fast he moved. A black sheen coated Shanks' blade as he parried, while Buggy darted in with his knives. For a moment, Izuku watched the whirling blades and darting flames with awe and wonder. His hand itched for his hero notes. But then, he remembered he was in a different world, surrounded by hordes of pirates out for blood, and decided that now wasn't the time to write a 10-page thesis on the possible composition of the blue flames. Glancing back and forth, Izuku saw swords clashing and pirates pummeling one another with their fists. Izuku raced past them all, staying low so he wouldn't be noticed, towards a spot where the fighting thinned out. As Izuku entered the calm area, he immediately decided that he'd rather be anywhere else. Whitebeard stood tall over a pile of Roger pirates. The butt of his naginata nudged a limp body off to the side, and his scarred chest stood bare. Izuku tried to backtrack, but a rowdy mob threw punches and slashed out around him. Whitebeard hauled one pirate up by the collar and gave him a gentle shake. "Come on, you didn't even bring Rayleigh." The pirate wheezed and chuckled. Someone had to keep Roger from spoiling the fight. Whitebeard grunted in irritation and tossed him aside. He took a flagon from an attending pirate, drained it in one gulp, and wiped the froth off his face. "Anyone else brave enough to fight me?" he roared. Izuku made himself very small, praying that Whitebeard wouldn't take his general existence as an excuse to add him to the pile. Luckily for him, Whitebeard had his attention drawn elsewhere. "Right here, old geezer," Luffy shouted. He hurled the bruised, unconscious body of the pirate with the mace at Whitebeard's feet and waited with arms crossed. "You've got balls, boy, I'll give you that." Whitebeard jammed his naginata into the sand, leaving it upright, and cracked his knuckles. "Too bad you don't have much else. I have this gum pistol." Luffy's fist shot forward. Whitebeard caught his wrist with contemptible ease. As Luffy pulled and struggled, Whitebeard shook his head and said, "You're 20 years too young to think you can challenge me. Screw you, I'm going to be the king of the pirates." "A king?" Whitebeard's voice dripped with contempt. "No one rules us, boy." Whitebeard yanked. Luffy flew forward, pulled by his own rubbery arm. With his free hand, Whitebeard wound up a punch. His fist turned black as he slammed it into Luffy's jaw. A resounding crack echoed across the beach. Blood sprayed into the air as Luffy's head reeled back. Whitebeard gave him a gentle shake, watching him for signs of life, before dropping him into the sand. The fighting slowed, then stopped, as the pirates turned to stare at Whitebeard. The wind howled across the beach, carrying the scent of blood, sweat, and the salty tang of sea spray. Izuku felt his stomach drop as he beheld Luffy's unmoving body, and he asked himself, was that his nose he heard cracking, or his skull? Luffy's hand clenched. Sand ran off his fingers as he rolled onto his feet. Wiping a dribble of blood off his mouth, Luffy tottered and raised his fists. "Ho!" Whitebeard crossed his arms and stared down at Luffy. "You're not giving up?" "Never." Luffy spat the word through swollen lips. "Then what are you waiting for? I'm right here." With a roar, Luffy rushed forward. His arms stretched backwards, nearly crossing the beach, before he shouted, "Gum bazooka!" Whitebeard took both palm strikes on the chest. Despite the mighty slap and rush of air, the pirate captain didn't twitch. Whitebeard's knee came up, catching Luffy in the gut. As Luffy doubled over, crying out in pain, Whitebeard grabbed Luffy by the scruff of the neck. He hauled him up and planted another fist in Luffy's chest. Again and again, Whitebeard hammered Luffy. A shoulder popped as Whitebeard dislocated it, and every inch of exposed skin turned black and purple as Whitebeard systematically beat down every inch of his opponent. Teeth went flying, and the blood turned red beneath Luffy's feet. Once Luffy more closely resembled a lump of hamburger than a human being, Whitebeard dropped him to the ground. Izuku stood, rooted to the spot, staring at the person who, by all rights, should be dead. He died, and Izuku just stood there watching. Shame and regret filled him. As Whitebeard turned away, the sand rustled. The captain stopped short and turned as Luffy rose slowly to his feet. Even with both eyes swollen shut, Luffy stared down Whitebeard and raised his fists. "Are you truly that determined to rule over everyone?" Whitebeard asked scornfully. "Rule? Screw that. I'll be the freest pirate of them all, and everyone will be free. Free to follow whatever dreams they have and eat all the meat they want." Whitebeard's expression softened. I see. But if you're going to make that happen, you'll need to get a lot stronger. I will. Just you wait, old man. I'll kick your ass. I'll hold you to that. Whitebeard pulled his naginata out of the sand. Izuku's eyes widened in horror as Whitebeard raised his blade at Luffy. Always remember this, kid. Remember and grow stronger. Luffy looked up, gazing fuzzily at the glinting weapon overhead, and grinned a gap-toothed smile. Izuku, heart hammering in his chest, acted on impulse. He sprinted forward with all the speed he could muster and leapt at Luffy. As they crashed towards the sand, Izuku felt a searing hot line draw itself across his shoulder and down his back. Watch it, twerp, Whitebeard shouted. I could have sliced your head off. Heart drumming in his ears, Izuku scrambled to his feet and hauled Luffy over one shoulder. Adrenaline surging through his veins like lightning, the world shrank to a pinprick of light as Izuku ran blindly forward. Every step sent a fresh surge of agony across his back, but Izuku gritted his teeth and churned through the soggy sand. A shape loomed in Izuku's blurry vision. A man, a sword, blocking the path. Izuku screamed and threw a punch. The man let out a pained yelp and shrank to his knees. Izuku rammed his head straight into the man's. He stepped over the unconscious pirate and kept running. Blood dripped into Izuku's eyes. He couldn't tell if it was Luffy's or his own. Running blind, he only stopped when he ran head first into a man's chest. Blinking his eyes clear, Izuku looked up. Roger knelt down and patted him on his good shoulder. Get some rest, kiddo. I'll be having a few words with Whitebeard. Panting as he flopped into the dirt, Izuku struggled to keep his eyes open. He blearily saw Roger, striding forward, sword writhing with purple light, while Whitebeard twirled his naginata. The clash of the two blades unleashed a hacky shockwave that made Izuku black out. It's time to ship out Bink's brew. Sea wing blows, to where who knows. The waves will be our guide. Ori across the ocean's tide. The strange song twirled in Izuku's left ear. His right was buried in the sand, along with half his face. Izuku groaned and tried to get up, but a hand forcibly shoved him back into the sand. Oh no, you don't, an old woman snapped at him. I did not sew you up just so you could run around and tear those stitches. Now hold still, I have a few left. Izuku tried to speak, but sand rushed in when he opened his mouth. Coughing and sputtering, Izuku didn't even feel the needle pierce his skin. With one last tug, the crone said, There, do something that's stupid again, and I'll charge you an arm and a leg for it. Literally. As the old doctor guffawed, Izuku cautiously rose to his knees. His head swam, but he pushed through his vertigo and rose to his feet. His shoulder felt taut like a drum and frustratingly itchy, and tingly cold from a salve rubbed into it. What happened? Izuku asked blearily. Hell if I know. That captain of yours dragged me over here and told me to fix everyone up. That cut on your back will leave quite a scar, but don't stress it too much, and you should have no problem moving your shoulder and back. Izuku craned his neck. He could just barely make out the twisted line of pink, inflamed flesh, knitted together with a thick black thread. Thank you, doctor. Don't sweat it. Now run along. I better make sure Herlock doesn't kill idiot number 2 over there. And you better talk to your lady friend over there before she thinks you're not good enough for you. Had to beat her off you with a stick before I could get the stitches in. As the doctor left, Izuku looked frantically around for Mei. He saw her off to the side, taking apart her cell phone. She had her shirt off, laying it on the sand to keep the grit off the discarded components. Izuku walked over and gingerly took a seat. I can't do anything, Mei said glumly. Izuku balked at her gloomy attitude. I can't either. I nearly died out there. You knocked out a pirate. I heard them talking about it. You saved that rubber boy and knocked someone out. I can't even make a slingshot. Sure you can. You're amazing, Mei. You've always been able to make what you put your mind to. There's no circuit boards, Izuku. No soldering guns, no prefabricated parts. They don't even have electricity. How can I make babies without any of my tools? If the tools you need don't exist yet, invent them. I need materials. Lots of them. Then we'll get them. Whatever you need, we'll find it. May looked up. Her eyes were red and puffy, and tears dampened her cheeks. She wiped away her tears and said, "Thanks, Izuku. We'll make the best babies the world has ever seen. See, I told you they were together." Izuku whirled and saw Shanks grinning at them as he elbowed Buggy in the side. Buggy's face twisted, and he said in a disgusted voice, "Please tell me they're not going to do it here." Shanks shrugged. "I hear it's best right after a battle, while you still got your blood pumping." Wiggling his eyebrows, he said, "All that blood goes to a different place, if you know what I mean." "Ooh, I should try that," May said. "Sounds perfect for baby making." As Buggy Fake vomited off to the side, Shanks laughed and said, "Maybe after the next battle." Shanks offered Izuku a hand and said, "You're missing out on the party. There's tons of guys that want to meet the crazy bastard that took a cut from Whitebeard for his friend." What about?" "Oh, don't worry, Izuku," May said. She gestured at her disassembled phone and said, "I need to put this together anyways." Hauling him up by his good arm, Shanks wrapped an arm carefully behind his back and turned him towards the sounds of drunken singing. "Saw you get a guy good while getting Luffy out of there. Nice headbutt." Shanks leaned up against him, and his face was flushed. He plopped Izuku next to a campfire and grabbed each of them a flagon of frothing beer. "Cheers," Shanks shouted as he sat next to Buggy. "To the kid with balls big enough to challenge Whitebeard, and the kid brave enough to bail him out. Quit cheering already. You're giving me a headache." Buggy groused as he drained his tankard. His eyelids were half closed, and he hiccuped. Izuku took a cautious drink. The brew tasted too bitter for his liking, but parched as he was, Izuku drained every last drop. "Cross the gold and silver seas. The salty spray puts us at ease. Day and night, to our delight. The voyage never ends." Izuku nodded along with the song drifting through the camp. Someone elbowed him in the arm and asked, "You heard this one before?" "No, I haven't." "What's it?" Izuku turned and dropped his mug. Marco grinned and downed his own mug. "Bink's sake. Best shanty on the Grand Line. Why don't you sing along? Lyrics aren't hard to pick up." Izuku looked around. At every campfire, the Roger pirates drank, sang, and swapped stories with Whitebeard's crew. Seeing Izuku's lost look, Shanks topped off Izuku's mug and said, "Bit of a tradition between our crews. Have a good fight. Have a good drink afterwards. Decent pirates, though they got nothing on us." Marco snorted. "Please, we got you good this time." "Oh," Shanks shot back. "I must have imagined all of you running in terror, with piss stains on your pants, the moment Roger hit the beach. That was beer. I sloshed some on my pants when I stopped for a drink. Must have been some shitty beer you were drinking if it smells like piss. Do you make a habit of smelling other people's pants? I could get you some of Gert's underwear. That tall hairy guy? I like having a nose, thanks." Izuku felt the world spin around him. But that wasn't new, was it? The world was always spinning. That's how days work. Shanks was also spinning, and there were two of him. Was that his quirk? Wait, there were two Marcos too. Was that his quirk? Did he just double the world? Izuku, I think you had a bit much." Buggy's face danced around Izuku like a psychedelic circus. Izuku looked down. He tipped the mug over his face and watched a couple drops plop onto his cheek. "Oh, I'm drunk." Izuku dropped the mug like it stung him. "No shit, you're drunk. How much did you have?" Under Buggy's glare, Shanks hastily said, "Whoa, I only gave him a couple mugs. Not my fault, he's a lightweight. I need to be not drunk, Izuku slurred. How do I? Vomit leapt up his throat and splashed all over Buggy. As the cabin boy cursed and ran for his knives, Shanks said sagely, exactly like that. Izuku wondered if he should be worried or relieved that he's starting to enjoy the arm-numbing, chest-burning sensation of working himself halfway to death as he lifted 10 entire barrels into the air. Rayleigh nodded approvingly and hefted another barrel on top. Good form. At least someone taught you how to lift properly. With your knees, not your back, Izuku grunted back. Knees, huh? And here I thought you lifted those barrels with your arms. Rayleigh turned to Luffy, who grunted and sweated under 8 barrels as sea prism cuffs weighed down his wrists. What about you? Are you going to let this sorry excuse for a landlubber show up a pirate like you? Eyes blazing, Luffy gritted out. 6 more. Your funeral, kid. Rayleigh chucked them all up at the same time. Luffy went cross-eyed as the weight brought him to his knees, but he shakily rose back to his feet. Well done, both of you, Rayleigh said. I think you're both ready for the fun stuff. Fun stuff? Izuku asked, suffering a sudden bout of dread. What do you? Rayleigh's fist rammed into his gut. Izuku wheezed and nearly dropped his load, but he didn't budge an inch. Feel that? Rayleigh asked, tapping the spot where he struck Izuku. Your muscles are all bunched up tight, like those wooden boards you've been swabbing. Tightening your muscles is a cheap but effective way of absorbing a blow that would otherwise knock you off your feet. The trick is making it happen when you're not carrying a ton of barrels. Izuku tiredly nodded his head. Rayleigh threw the same punch at Luffy, who didn't even twitch under a blow that rang across the deck. Good. You can put those down now. Izuku gently eased them onto the deck, while Luffy let them tumble like Jenga blocks. Gah, Luffy rasped. You're worse than Grandpa. I'll take that as a compliment, brat. Rayleigh grinned behind his glasses. Now, both of you have built enough strength for what comes next. Ooh, what? Luffy asked. Are we going to punch a boulder? No, wait, a mountain? Rayleigh disappeared. Luffy went hurtling backwards as a fist slammed out of nowhere into his face. Rayleigh popped up behind Izuku's shoulder. Kick off the ground 10 times in a second, with all the strength in your legs, and you can gain blinding speed in an instant. Izuku jumped and whirled to his right, only for Rayleigh to blur behind his back. He grabbed Izuku's collar and hurled him across the deck. By the end of today, Rayleigh said with his arms crossed, you'll either get very good at dodging or very good at taking my fist to your face. Your pick. Aw, I'm so bored, Hatsune wailed as she downed another tankard of liquid that the other pirates assured him was definitely not rum. She belched loudly and shakily held up her empty mug. Another. Yeah, we cut her off after her second pint, the bartender said with a grin as he refilled her tankard from a barrel. Nothing but rainwater for her until she can stare at me without going cross-eyed. Which, given her eyes, might be a bit of a challenge. Of course I'm cross-eyed. It's my quirk. Hatsune slapped the top of her head. I can see the orcs taking the hobbits to Isengard with these bad boys. The bartender cast Izuku a questioning look. He replied, Lord of the Rings reference, and the bartender only looked more confused. Come on, May, Izuku said, nudging her shoulder. I think you should go to bed. No, May slurred. I think you should go to bed. I want to make babies. That got snickers out of every pirate within earshot, and a frustrated howl from Buggy. Izuku helped her out of the stool and said, We can make babies later, just like I promised. For now, bedtime. You said we would make babies weeks ago. And look, no babies. May, you know we can't do that here. We're on a ship. So? We'll make ship babies. I've got loads of ideas. And I'm sure they won't sink the ship we're on. But for now, bedtime. Babies. Bedtime. Babies. Babies, Izuku repeated. Bedtime. All right, bedtime it is. Hatsune blinked and looked owlishly at him. You tricked me, she pouted. Tell you what, Izuku said. Walk in a straight line to the door, and we'll make babies right now. You promise? Absolutely. Hatsune's drunken stagger disappeared, and she walked briskly and evenly to the door. Well, she asked, was that not perfectly straight? Izuku sputtered. You were faking this whole time. Of course I was. I wasn't going to drink myself silly and throw up all over the place like you did. And I'm bored. Izuku sighed. He knelt down and tilted his head around. I don't know. That doesn't look perfectly straight. It's a bit crooked right about there. Is not. My eyes never lie. Well, you are a bit cross-eyed. Hatsune gasped. You take that back. Izuku stood on a tiny, wooded island, wobbling as his legs reacclimated to solid land. Luffy stretched as far as his sea prism cuffs allowed. Shanks grinned and told a joke while Buggy watched the woods with a far-eyed stare of past trauma. Rayleigh called down to them from a tree branch. The lot of you have the basics of the 6 powers down, but now's the time to put them to the ultimate test. With as densely wooded as this place is, your Soru better be absolutely perfect. If it isn't, you better pray like hell's before you that your tech eye is good enough to take a tree to the face. Hell is before us, Buggy muttered. Buggy, since you're listening to me so nice and quietly, Rayleigh said darkly, you can practice this exercise in 6 pieces. I'll be counting. Buggy gulped. And to make this even more fun, Rayleigh went on, I've thrown in a few traps to keep you on your toes. Pay extra careful attention to your surroundings, and you might spot them before you end up belly deep in a pit full of centipedes. Even Shanks and Luffy shivered at that, both their good spirits gone in an instant. Buggy chortled at them, floating above his own shoes, when Rayleigh made eye contact with him and added, there's hornet nests too, I should imagine. But they're pretty high up. Most of you shouldn't have to worry about it. Oh, come on, Buggy roared. Take as much time as you like going through there. Just keep in mind, I'll be eating your lunch while I wait. Fires lit up in Luffy's eyes. With his stomach rumbling, as Rayleigh had warned them not to eat that morning for their training, Izuku found himself equally motivated. Have fun, kids, Rayleigh called over his shoulder as he leapt through the trees. And try not to die in here. Luffy ran off, his sandals ripping up the dirt with each stride. Shanks ran hot on his heels, sword drawn, while Buggy reluctantly broke into pieces and floated after him. Izuku took a more leisurely pace through the woods. He reasoned that he'd lose far more time blindly running into traps. And he had a vague suspicion that the centipedes in this universe were far bigger and nastier than the variety he was used to. Everything else was. A low growl startled Izuku out of his thoughts. He turned and saw a bear lumbering towards him. Oh, phew, Izuku said, chuckling. It's just a bear. Then his brain caught up with his words, and his expression grew horrified. Oh shit, it's a bear. The bear roared and sprinted towards him. With a shriek of terror, Izuku zipped away with Soru. As a brown blur raced towards his head, Izuku bent over backwards, spine parallel to the ground. A branch whipped past his nose. Izuku stopped for a breather and examined the branch that nearly took his head off. Rayleigh was right, Izuku muttered. With that kind of speed, it's nearly impossible to react in time. I can't jump blindly, or I'll crack my nose on something. A furious growl came from behind him. Izuku sighed. Oh right, the bear. The moment Izuku moved, the bear's claws tore through the tree bark behind him. The tree came crashing down, and Izuku hastily leapt into the air to avoid its branches. A snake darted out from a nearby tree. With a surprised yelp, Izuku kicked on the air, getting just enough distance to avoid the snake's fangs. flipping and landing perfectly on his feet. Izuku beamed at the snake and shouted, "Better luck next time." Izuku heard an irritated growl. He turned around and saw the bear, giving him the stink eye. "Look, I'm sorry I'm forgetting about you so easily," Izuku said. "I'd usually be terrified of a bear, but after those piranhas the size of my head, and those giant ants trying to bite off my ankles, a bear is just, well." The bear roared and swiped at him. Izuku ducked, letting the claws pass over him, then leapt up and hit the bear's muzzle with an uppercut. The bear whimpered and fell backwards with a heavy thud. "Phew! All right, now I can." A bear cub ran out of the underbrush and shook the fallen bear. Another bear ambled in from behind, gave the scene a shocked expression, and took out a transponder snail. As Izuku watched, more bears poured in, including half a dozen in white jackets. The bear pulled out a crumpled piece of paper and read it with a series of low, rumbling growls. Then, nodding to his fellows, the bear held out a paw, and another rushed to put a large, spherical rock the size of Izuku's head into it. Izuku sprinted for dear life as a thrown boulder smashed through the undergrowth, leaving a circular hole through the foliage. Using Soru as much as he dared, ducking and dodging around rocks thrown like cannonballs, Izuku kept ahead of the bears until he managed to lose them at a ravine. Izuku panted and leaned against the dirt wall. "Bear cops, okay? Those are a thing. Better get moving before Rayleigh eats all the—" Izuku's foot hit a tripwire. He froze, searching for the trap he just set off. A dud. "Huh, guess I got lucky." As Izuku kept walking, he heard the rush of water. Looking back, Izuku yelped as he saw a deluge of water, with piranhas snapping eagerly in the waves, crashing down towards him. Izuku leapt, and his feet barely cleared the water as it surged under him. With a few shaky jeppo, stepping on the air itself, Izuku stumbled onto the shore of the new river. "Please tell me I'm getting close." A low growl answered him. Izuku groaned and faced the 6 bears behind him. One hefted a rock in a paw. "Enough with the bears already." "And then I led the bears into the centipede pit, flipped out of there, and ran like crazy until I made it here," Izuku said, punctuating his story with a sip of his generously watered-down beer. "Ah, the bears," Rayleigh said fondly. "Garp got drunk on this one island one weekend. Blame him if we ever run across him." "You fought bears?" Luffy asked. "Lucky. I only ran into a whole bunch of traps." "PFFT, you're one to talk," Buggy grumbled. "That last trap catapulted you here. Meanwhile, I had to dodge mafia magpies. I mean, seriously, magpies." "Sounds like you all had fun," Shanks said, grinning. "I wish I ran into something. I just strolled through the woods and made it out." "Lucky bastard." Rayleigh regarded them warmly and sipped his own beer. "You kids did well. The 4 of you could take just about anything that paradise could throw at you. The New World, now that's a different beast altogether. Any pirate hoping to last a week on the other side of Fishman Island needs at least one form of haki." Buggy groaned. "We already have haki. Why are you giving us this lecture again?" Rayleigh flung a rock at him. Buggy yelped as it left a red welt on his forehead. "Are you sure you have haki? Even the greenest pirate past the red line would have dodged that one." As Buggy grumbled angrily and rubbed his forehead, Izuku's brain hit the brakes. "Haki? What's that?" Rayleigh stood. As he cocked his arm back, a black aura engulfed it from the shoulder down, then he punched straight down. Branches shook, birds squawked and took off in a flapping cloud, and a bowl of smoked salmon rattled off the table before Luffy caught it with his outstretched mouth. "Does that answer your question?" Rayleigh asked. "But how did you do that?" Izuku asked, mind whirling at 1,000,000 miles an hour. "And how did your collarbone withstand the force you exerted on the ground?" The color change didn't extend past the shoulder. unless there was an internal component that didn't appear on the surface. Rayleigh flicked Izuku on the forehead. Haki isn't something that you understand, Izuku. It's something that you do, that you feel, deep down in your heart. And how do I do that? Well, I was hoping you'd figure it out during your stroll. But seeing that you did not, we'll have to unlock yours the hard way. After seeing the serious expression on Rayleigh's face, Izuku didn't get much sleep that night. Steady, just a little more. May, are you sure this is going to work? It's a crossbow, Izuku. They made those things back in medieval time. How hard can this be? Izuku's arms strained as he bent back the twin arms of the crossbow, while May tied some corded fishing line on each end. It's a crossbow that fires grenades, May. I don't think anyone's ever made that. Exactly. It's a May original invention. You can let go now. Izuku gently released the arms. As the makeshift bowstring settled, the entire crossbow began to vibrate violently. Izuku grabbed May, used Soru to vanish them both, and ducked behind an overturned table. The crossbow exploded with a loud, sharp crack, scattering splinters across the room. Izuku poked his head out from behind the table and saw a splinter driven into its surface. We didn't even load a grenade in, and it already exploded, Izuku said. Yeah, I wonder if we could make it a weapon that way. Just throw your crossbow at them, and boom. Isn't that just a grenade? You're right. May sat and thought for a moment. But if there was a grenade loaded, it would be a double grenade. If we really wanted that, we could just glue 2 grenades together. Ah, why does this have to be so hard? May kicked a splinter across the floor. Do you have any idea how long I spent carving those? And I had to make that bowstring out of fishing line by hand. I spent hours twirling threads together. They have guns and stuff, May. I'm sure we'll find better tools once we make port. We tried, Izuku. Drum Kingdom didn't even have a power drill. I had to carve all those parts with a chisel, Izuku. Izuku felt lost, seeing the crushed expression on May's face. Usually, an explosion such as this one would bring a soot-stained smile on her face, and she'd get right back to work on the smoking remains of her invention. Now, they were both lost, and Izuku had no idea how to help her. I don't know what to do, Izuku admitted. I can't get you the parts you need from some beach. I can't fetch you tools while you work. We're alone out here. As Hatsune looked ready to fall apart like her own invention, Izuku gently put his hands on her shoulders. However, he said, I know you're strong enough to make this work. Somehow. And when you figure out how, no one will ever be able to stop you from inventing again. They take away your tools. You'll make better ones. They cut the power. Screw the power. You have hands. And even if you lost your arms and legs, you could make prosthetics with your teeth. May sniffled and wiped away her tears. You're right. This is just a roadblock on the way to Hatsune Industries. You want power armor? I'll build it in a cave, with a pile of scraps. Okay, Tony Stark. Why don't we get your last baby cleaned up? Nope, too fired up. These babies need making now. As May sprinted for the top deck, Izuku sighed and pulled splinters out of the walls. Izuku ducked right. He felt a moment of triumph before a pebble hit him squarely in the forehead. You're dodging, but you're not listening, Rayleigh chastised him. Izuku lifted the blindfold and got another rock to the cheek. Did I say you could take that off? Sorry. And you, Rayleigh said, flinging another rock at Luffy. He didn't even budge as it smacked into the growing bump between his eyebrows. You're not even trying. Screw that, Luffy shouted back. I'm tougher than a stupid pebble. Keep giving me that attitude, and the next one'll be between your legs. Focus. Izuku heard Rayleigh's feet shuffle against the deck. He ducked left and got a pebble to the ear. Better. But you dodged right into that. Forget your other senses. Forget trying to dodge. Let the pebble tell you what it's going to do. What does that even mean? Another pebble beamed him on the chin. It means focus, Rayleigh snapped. Ha! Buggy shouted from the mast. I'm so glad we don't have to do that anymore. Rayleigh flung a pebble at him. Buggy split a section of his body, letting the pebble fly through. You missed. Rayleigh's next pebble got him between the eyes. Buggy yelped and fell head first off the mast. The road to mastering one's haki is never finished. Don't think you get to slack off now that you can predict me once or twice. As the pebbles continued flying and Izuku kept failing to dodge them, he heard one strike something with a metallic ping. Luffy shouted, "Ha! Barely felt that one." Izuku took off his blindfold. Luffy's forehead was covered in a black metallic sheen. The cracked remains of the pebble trickled off his brow. Only a knucklehead like you would learn armament haki in an exercise designed to train your observation. Does that mean I win? Luffy asked. The pebble in Rayleigh's hand took on a black color. When it struck Luffy's head, he went flying backwards into the rail. It means you better keep that up all day or start dodging. Crocus will get mad at me if he has to dig a rock out of your skull. Izuku tried feeling the rock, tried listening for whatever Rayleigh expected him to hear. No matter what he tried, he got a rock to the face. Izuku wondered if he'd get a bump sprouting from his forehead like a unicorn if they kept it up long enough. Maybe the brain damage would help somehow. It might explain how Luffy managed to get haki first. Izuku, Mei shouted. Are you done yet? You said we'd make babies hours ago. I'm still working on, Mei, look out. Izuku dashed across the deck and tackled Mei to the ground. A loud, meaty slap hit the deck behind him. You all right, Mei? No, I'm not. You crushed the baby I'm working on. Don't worry, it'll be easy to make again. We could do it right now. Please don't, Buggy said. I hear enough just passing by my door. I really don't want to know what you do with all those ropes. Hey, Izuku. Rayleigh gave him a smug grin. How did you know she'd get crushed by that fish? Izuku looked at the deck behind him. A swordfish twice the size of him flopped on the deck and tried gouging at the legs of everyone near it. A pirate strode up with a harpoon and speared it through the head. Sorry, that one got away from me. He hauled it over one shoulder and added, On the bright side, we're having steaks tonight. As the deck cleared, Izuku asked, Did I just do the haki thing? Rayleigh clapped a hand on Izuku's shoulder. You sure did, kid. And now that I have an idea of how you did it, we're gonna have your girlfriend help. Izuku and Mei shared a look of terror. After he tied Mei to the mast and had Izuku guarding her from thrown knives, Mei asked, Is your training always like this? Izuku flinched as a knife bounced off the wooden tray he held. This isn't so bad. Usually, the knives are sharp. What do we do if we can't make it back home? The sounds of mechanical tinkering stopped, and Mei poked her head out from the hood of the DeLorean. We will. No point thinking about it. But I mean, we have to get this car going 88 miles an hour, right? Mei guiltily looked away. Well, not exactly. What does that mean? That whole 88-mile thing is just a movie reference. The car could be standing still, and it would work. Really? Why haven't we gotten back already? Mei winced. Well, I programmed it to only start the time travel process when the car's traveling at that speed, and without a computer to change the programming. So we do have to get up to 88 miles an hour. Yes. And they don't have paved roads. I could always get the flight module working again. Izuku frowned. Couldn't we just spin the tires fast enough to make the car think it's going that fast? Normally, we could. Izuku slapped his forehead. You redesigned the speedometer, didn't you? How else were we supposed to get accurate measurements while flying? And that means we need to get up to 88 miles an hour somehow. That's right. And we don't even have a train like they did in the third movie. We could invent one. Izuku sighed. Guess we'll be here a while then. Hey, it's not so bad. These guys are super nice, right? Yeah, I guess you're right. Izuku felt his stomach drop as he stared at the newspaper a giant seagull had deposited into his lap. The bird squawked angrily at him until Shanks shoved some money into its bag. Hey, that's the new bounty list. Did I finally make it on? Shove off, Buggy said, trying to get closer. I want to see. Gold Roger's face grinned up at him. Below, the bounty offered a staggering price tag for his head that, even with Izuku's primitive understanding of this world's currency, made his head spin. 5 billion. Even with this world's inflation what it was, that was more money than most people would see in their lifetimes. What made him debate jumping off the ship again were the list of crimes. Murder, arson, theft, and more. Izuku felt his perceptions of the Roger pirates crumbling around him. Every face he saw made him flinch, and his heart skittered with every boisterous laugh. Next island they found. He didn't care if it was just a patch of sand. He and May were off this ship. Land ho. Relief filled Izuku's heart. He peered over the rail and felt his despair return. Before him lay a wretched hive of scum and villainy, plain to his eyes even a mile from shore. Dilapidated shacks and threadbare tents, piled into a malodorous heap that fouled the water and sullied the breeze. Empty bottles bobbed in the waves, ships traded cannonballs and even rammed each other for docking space. And the odd gunshot punctuated the raucous shouting that welled up from the bars and brothels. Rayleigh stepped up next to him. That's Jaya, he said grimly. Pirate haven, and not the nice sort. Don't wander off. Keep one hand on your wallet and the other on a knife. And don't ask what's in Priscilla's spicy buns. As they weighed anchor in a secluded cove, Izuku resolved to jump ship on the next island.